There's no YouTube video that can have as long and lasting an impact as a book, because when we read, we begin simulating the mind of the other characters that we're encountering. And through that mind meld, you can reconstitute, restructure your brain. And you can come out of a book thinking about your life completely differently, which is just the most powerful thing we can do, is that the right book at the right time can transform the way you understand the world. And I kind of joke sometimes, my whole career is built on giving two-word terms to things that everyone already thinks and knows. When is it appropriate for someone to get unrestricted internet access? The safe answer is 16.
Hey everybody, this is Neil Pasricha, and welcome back to chapter 135 of 3 books. Yes, you have joined our 22-year-long pilgrimage to uncover and discuss the 1,000 most formative books in the world. Today we have a wonderful long-form conversation with the one and only Cal Newport, a guide, a visionary, a role model to me and millions of other people on living an intentional life and a productive life amidst our noisy, scatterbrained, tech-drenched world. Cal is an MIT trained computer science professor at Georgetown University, and he's the author of 10 books, which have collectively sold over 2 million copies, including Deep Work Digital Minimalism, and his latest bestseller, Slow Productivity. Cal says in our conversation, I sometimes joke that my entire career is built on giving two-word terms to things everyone knows and thinks. He's being humble when he says that, because the truth is he's doing a lot more than that. Let's take slow productivity, for example. He's boiled this new phrase down into 3 principles. Do fewer things, is number 1. 2, work at a natural pace. And number 3, obsess over quality. Maybe sounds simple, maybe even trite. You're like, doesn't that sound obvious? But that's when you kind of pull your head up and realize that the whole world is conspiring against you doing any of those things. I mean, doesn't our world today reward doing more things, working at an unnatural pace, and obsessing over quantity? I mean, that's kind of the design of the world today. How many posts can you get out on your feed? How many cold calls can you make? I mean, we're always kind of going after things the wrong way. There's a reason Cal has no social media apps on his phone. Actually, doesn't just have no social media apps on his phone. He has no social media. He's never been on social media ever. With his books and his wonderful podcast called Deep Questions, which I highly recommend you check out, Cal is focused on helping us navigate and find our way through the ever-changing technology and work patterns that increasingly feel at odds with our shared quest of living intentional lives. So, what are we going to talk about today? Well, he's got a giant mind, Cal does, and it was on full display as we discuss how Cal measures success. We've got an opening conversation about the new book that just came out, like, how does he think about success? The neuroscience of reading, Denis Villeneuve, the relationship between rest and work, the ideal age for unrestricted internet access, the Washington Nationals, Leet Speak and Productivity Prom, the role of books today and their future, Andrew Huberman, positive reinforcement theory, Jonathan Haidt and the anxious generation, technology boundaries for children, and much, much more. Let's jump into chapter 135 now. Hi, Cal.
Hey, Neil.
It's so nice to finally meet.
I know. I mean,
because it was an email 8 years ago.
8 years? What? Oh my God, I'm so old.
That I have from Monday, February 29th, 2016, from Brian Johnson. Guys, I've told you both about the other. You are now connected. Have fun. And I wrote this hilariously nerdy, like geeky, stupid reply. Calvin, I wrote. Calvin. Does anyone call you Calvin?
My foreign academic collaborators, because so you're joining
just the foreign ones.
Well, yes, because they don't know me, because I don't see them normally. They're different. When I see them at conferences, I publish academic papers under the name Calvin. So they still call me Calvin, but and you, I always say, yes, my foreign collaborators and Neil. There we go.
That's awesome. Well, I had written this note, and then you had written back a very kind note, and it was like, it's great to hear from you. And I love that you spell here, Here. That like made me feel like you were human, you know, because I do that. I spell there wrong.
Yeah.
Almost 1 in 3 times I spell any of those words. I'm excited to see your book, and my address is below. You probably won't believe this, but years ago I was thinking about positive psychology, and I thought someone should write a book with the exact name, The Happiness Equation. I'm glad someone did.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah, I remember thinking about that at some point. Like, oh, if we made this mathematical, I had a whole thing on it. I think I probably still have the copy that like you or your publisher sent me. It's somewhere. I saw it recently. I think I still have it from back then.
And you seem like a title obsessed kind of guy too, because like I loved on Deep Questions, your wonderful podcast that everybody should listen to. It's really, really, really good, and it's powerful how you do it. It's really like high signal, you know. You said you were talking about the title of Slow Productivity and the resonance you were getting kind of even before it came out, and I thought, wow, this is a guy that thinks a lot about titles. Like you had said that you had the same sort of pre-publication resonance with, I think, Deep Work, and maybe one other of your books. Yeah. So I was wondering, what is this pre-publication resonance that comes from a guy that's been publishing books since he was undergrad? You know, like what is this thing that you figured out here?
What I figured out is if you have a term that people aggressively agree with and then begin riffing on, hearing nothing but the term, you're probably hitting on something, right? So Deep Work was like this. You know, people just
have a term,
yes,
that people are aggressively agreeing with,
yes,
and riffing on. So it's a double. You have two things there. They can't just aggressively agree. They also then are trying to build on it.
Yeah,
and then
you know, you're on the. You know, you're capturing. And I kind of joke sometimes. My whole career is built on giving 2-word terms to things that everyone already thinks and knows, right? But you're tapping something that is really out there, right? So like the term Deep Work, people are just like, yes. I mean, I don't even know exactly what you mean, Cal, but like this seems important. Digital minimalism was similar. Just as people were beginning to get wary about their phones, like I need to be a digital minimalist. Slow productivity had a similar thing. Like, yes, that's what I want.
You famously tested it, I think, on the Tim Ferriss show in, I think, 2021.
I did. I tested it on Tim's show. I tested it first. I tried to go back and pull this timeline. I tested it within some newsletter articles. I tested it on Tim's show, and I think that was right around the same time I tested it in the New Yorker as well. So I was sort of putting out trial balloons. And if you look at all those discussions, by the way, those early discussions, it's capturing maybe a third of the big ideas from the book. So it was still an early point, but I was seeing if the term resonated. And I saw it pop up a bunch of places after that. People like, yeah, we believe in slow productivity. Here's what we're doing to try to implement slow productivity. People started using the term, even though I hadn't really defined it yet. And so I was like, okay, there's something there.
And it's funny that you're also testing things like Tim's show gets more downloads than either of us sells books. You know what I mean? Like he's got like 800 million, 900 million, maybe a billion even now downloads. I know they're more ephemeral, but you're also testing your book titles, like books, like you were number 2 on the New York Times bestseller list in your first week. And collectively, you and I both got to throw some bottles through James Clear's window, I think, after this conversation, because the Atomic Habits for the 232nd week. I wasn't necessarily number 1 all 232 weeks, but for 200, come on, James, could you give Cal a break on like the first week of his book?
I know, he was number 1. Here's the crazy thing about James, by the way, was when my last book went on the New York Times bestseller list, I got a note from James. It was like, hey, this is great. We're both on the New York Times bestseller list. This is another book later. He's still on the New York Times bestseller list.
Did he give you a note this time at least?
I don't know. I think this time it's not his novel. I think back then, this was really close. I guess my last book was closer to when Atomic Habits came out. I think he was still checking the list back then. I think now, like, why bother? He could just assume, like, I'm sure my book is on it. So it was when he was still excited that he was still on the list. That's crazy. A whole book went by and he still hasn't left that list.
Yeah, exactly. 232 weeks is nothing to sniff at. That is almost 5 years.
Yeah.
In total. Do you see the lists as anything anymore? Like, how do you measure success?
I mean, honestly, the thing I care about is the 2-year total sale all format number.
Ooh,
right.
That's great.
That's what matters to me. Like the list is a lot about pre-orders. The list is a lot about converting your existing audience to buy a book sooner rather than later, which is nice. I think it's like a win. It's a win for the team. There's probably a long-term effect to have the medallion on the book cover that says New York Times bestseller, because that's going to maybe increase your conversion rate of someone encountering the book by, 5%. But that could add up, right?
And the conversion rate might be also the indie bookstore that decides to sell it or whatever.
Yeah.
That the conversion rate might not also be sales, but curation.
It used to be able to convert into more media, not so much anymore, not necessarily coming off the advice how-to list, because which is, by the way, the harder of the list by far.
You're competing against cookbooks.
Which, by the way, the next week, the number one book was a cookbook. Yeah. So that's nice. That's nice. But the thing that I care about is the 2 years list. And the reason why I care about the 2 year number is
and can you tell people what that is? I
literally just mean
2 year total sales, all formats. How many books got sold in the first 2 years? You didn't say 1 year. You didn't say 3 years. You said 2 years. You said all formats.
Yeah. If for me, if a book's going to be successful, it takes you have to add up these sales over multiple years, not what's happening in the launch window, but what happens over 2 years. And the reason why I care about that is my sort of entrance as a successful writer all happened on a very slow trajectory. So the book, I'll tell you the story. So here's the backstory, right? My first 3 books I wrote them when I was young.
Tell us the titles and tell us the years.
So the first book was How to Win at College, 2005. I wrote that during my senior year of college. And then I followed that right up in 2006 with a book called How to Become a Straight A Student. And then a couple of years later, a book called How to Become a High School Superstar. Those are the only types of books you could get Random House to give a book deal to a 21-year-old for, right? Because I wanted to write, but a 21-year-old, I can't show up and say, I want to write about work and distraction. Or they're like, great, become 20 years older. But what I did pitch them on was, I'm a student. I understand students. I'm going to write a book for students that students will resonate.
I won at college. I'll show you how.
Yeah, and I interviewed other people, but basically that was the idea. And then my first big hardcover idea book came out when I turned 30. This was So Good They Can't Ignore You. And then the book after that was Deep Work.
When you were 30, meaning that when it was like 2012. 12.
Yeah.
Okay, your first big book came out in 2012, Deep Work. Good. Sorry. So Good They Can't Ignore You.
So Good They Can't Ignore You. Now, here's the thing. That book, at least for me, so there was an auction for it, and for me as a postdoc at the time, I was like, this is a lot of money. It was my first sort of major book that there was actually some money behind. It disappointed out of the gate, right? So it was
relative to the advance.
Relative to the advance and relative to just, it just didn't do much out of the gate. It was at this interesting tipping point where podcast, that whole ecosystem wasn't here yet. And there's still a traditional ecosystem. And so when I pitched Deep Work, they said, well, we're going to lower your advance from what you got for So Good They Can't Ignore You, because it's not really doing that well. So then Deep Work comes out, and I remember being disappointed right off the bat because it was the advance had been lowered. The book was just put out there. Not a lot was happening at first. And I remember really getting upset because a good friend of mine, his parents went to Barnes & Noble to pick up a copy, and they didn't even have it in stock. This was the first week. And I remember my age, why? I was like, this is such a great idea for a book. Why can't I get, support for this? Why is it not everywhere? I know it's a great idea for a book. And she gave me this really hard advice, which is numbers are what matters. They just look at numbers. Your last one didn't sell that much. This is what a launch looks like for, an author whose last book sold that much. But here's the thing about Deep Work. It started to catch on. And it had this slow build. This is why I care about, to go back to the original point, these big windows. But also why I care about not just the launch is that Deep Work was never been on a bestseller list. Maybe on the aggregated business Wall Street Journal list briefly, but it never was a New York Times bestseller. Never on a bestseller list. Never on an Amazon chart. Maybe has rarely been under 1,000 in any one day on sales rank. The book has sold almost 2 million copies.
Wow, that one book?
That one book.
Wow.
And it was just, people talked about it. And I started doing podcasts. I would just say yes to any podcast. And it just, that thing just got a life of its own. And then what happened to So Good They Can't Ignore You? That's now a 300,000 copy seller. It followed behind. And so my whole mindset is now geared towards, if a book's going to hit, it takes a while.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do the James Clear thing. I don't know how to just get on the bestseller list and be there for 5 years.
You have to have a 1 million person email list. I mean, a lot of it starts with what Sahil Bloom is doing today or what Dan Go is doing today, and the tremendous amount of investment. I don't mean just time. I mean just there's a financial investment, there's a time investment,
Yeah.
there's a Sahil's list went from 100K to 700K in a year. Dan's list went from 500K to 200K in a year. So these guys are post-book deal, but pre-book publication. And so the conversion after giving some, and I felt this with the Book of Awesome too in 2010. Like when I was able to say on my blog, hey, I got a new book, everyone was like, well, I've been reading this guy's blog for free for years. But when I'm like, hey, I got a 5th book, people are like, oh yeah, like I already bought your first 3 books, guy.
we're used to it. Yeah, that's true. First books with big lists, you get big conversion. But it takes time. So that's how, I mean, it's hard to sell a very large amount. When you're talking like numbers healthily in the 6 figures or beyond, it just takes time to sell that many books. I mean, you can't get that many people to buy a book in a single week. You can look at the very best-selling nonfiction books. If you go into BookScan and look at these numbers, like the very best-selling, like here's my debut and it's a fantastic debut, you're not going to see more than 30,000 books sold in a week or whatever. And that's just for the 1 week. Yeah. That's for the launch week, though, right? So yeah, that's the reality of the book world. Is only so many people are buying a book on any given week, and like even if you have a healthy percentage of those people buying your book, you can't sell 1 million copies of a book in a month. You know, maybe Harry Potter, but like otherwise you can't do it. It takes time. So that's the time scale I look at it, because I think of my launch windows, like I have an audience, they like me, they're interested, they'll buy. My serious audience will probably buy what I do in the first week. Like to me, like the 3rd week matters a lot more than the first, because that tells me if there's legs.
Interesting. The 3rd week matters a lot more than the first.
Well, the first week, no one's heard about it. I mean, no one's read it yet. So it's just like, I know Cal Newport. I saw him on Ferris and Huberman and Adam Grant and Rich Roll and Ryan's and like all these other guys' podcasts, right? Like, like let's give this a try. I know Cal, but like week 3, most of that stuff has come out, and so hopefully they're still hearing about it. So. It's a weird world, man. It's a weird world.
Well, and that's why it kind of begs the bigger, you're kind of a visionary, right? Like you are able to see around corners more than most people are. I think that's where your long form New Yorker pieces have really, you're almost like, I've always thought the New Yorker is like kind of saying how things really are, but you're almost saying how things really are becoming. Yeah. And so I'm curious about your macro level view. Forget Neil, forget Cal, forget your books, forget my books. Just what is your macro level view on books? Period.
I think the format's durable. It's the best bargain sort of in the human intellectual experience. Because you're spending...
books are the best bargain in the human intellectual experience.
Yes, because you're spending $20 to get what a mind that has specialized on an idea for years and has spent years trying to crystallize that knowledge into like the optimal structure. You get to transfer all that cognitive effort from that brain into your brain for like $20. And that's such a powerful thing. It's the only mind reading of any sort of great bandwidth that we have right now is a book that I can take years of thinking and transport that to your brain by giving you this artifact of information captured with characters that I'm handing off to you. And so I think this is why books have been durable, and they've been durable throughout so many different media revolutions. It's hard to replicate what you get out of that. What I really like, for example, about pragmatic nonfiction, so I in my books, there's usually a real pragmatic portion to it, is you can induce physiological states in your reader, right? And this is what I grew up with being around these books, is that feeling of an advice book, that feeling of suddenly your internal schema of understanding the world shifts in a way where new opportunities for you that are very exciting emerge. That just feels so good. Like, oh my God, I could do this, and this opens up this opportunity, and it's going to change my life for the better. And it's such a high, and you can induce that with paper. It's such an awesome, interesting thing. I mean, books are really personal.
And I agree with you. I always call books the greatest form of compressed wisdom that we have. Yep. I mean, there's a reason when people go to tedtalks.com, they read the transcript. I mean, like, so the speech is 18 minutes long, but I can read the thing in 3 minutes. There's a reason why, like, Apple Podcasts just released the transcription thing, and hasn't it already? Have you noticed? Like, people open it and they're like skimming reading the thing because the podcasts are so long. So maybe you're reading this right now as opposed to listening to it. And I get that. And so I've always been trying to say, well, books are the greatest form of compressed. But at the same time, Cal, 57% of Americans read 0 books last year. American Time Use study from our mutual friend Johan Hari from his book Stolen Focus. Highest number it's ever been throughout history. From what I understand from, I think, some things you've looked at, but also people like, Prof. Galloway and so on are showing that, like, below a certain age, below 25 this, below 20 that, below 15 this, and maybe you've seen this with your own kids, their consumption of reading is smaller than it has been for previous generations, and TikTok is eating everything type. Like, I do worry about books, even though I'm bullish on them. I'm like, do you not see this happening at the same, like, isn't everything kind of going YouTube-y?
Maybe, but the period where books lost their supremacy as the only game in town and the most appealing game in town for distraction was really radio and most definitely TV, right? So that ship has already sailed. So the interesting counterpoint numbers to those numbers is book sales are stable or growing, right? Especially hardcover book sales. Ebooks are sort of staggering. People are sort of moving away from ebooks and moving towards, if you're going to do that, you'd rather listen to a book. And so audio is going up, ebooks are going down. But book sales are not falling. So when you hear these numbers, like this is the lowest the read 0 books has ever been, what's happening there is what you're shifting is maybe someone who read 1 book going to 0. So yeah, that number can get, the 0 book number can jump up.
Non-readers are growing.
Yeah. And then at the margins, you're getting like the marginal, like I if I get really excited, like I hear about, Dave Goggins on Rogan and maybe I'll read his book, like sort of the marginal readers, maybe you lose them, that number can really jump up, but without really affecting necessarily how many books are being sold in a given year. That being said, I want that number of reading 0 books to be much smaller because of what you're saying is like, it's the best not the best compressed knowledge. What else do we have that can change your life so thoroughly? There's no other medium that I know of. There's no YouTube video that can have as long and lasting an impact as a book, because when we read, and I don't know the full neuroscience of this. I think Marilyn Wolfe would be good on this. I don't know the full neuroscience on this, but we begin simulating the mind of the other characters that we're encountering. It really is a mind meld. You get this in movies as well. It's really a mind meld. And through that mind meld, you can restructure your brain. And you can come out of a book thinking about your life completely differently, which is just the most powerful thing we can do, is that the right book at the right time can transform the way you understand the world.
Oh my gosh, you said it so well. And there is something about that first person narrative. I also always say, like, look, if you read Dune, you're the director. You picture the characters. You picture the sets. You picture those things underground in the sand. I don't remember what they're called. You picture all that. You picture the music. You picture the lighting. You picture the costumes. When you watch the Denis Villeneuve vehicle, as I'm going to do later today, he picks the characters. He picks the costumes. He picks the music. He picks the lights. And like just the percentage of stuff you got to do is just much smaller.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool. I saw it in the theater when I was down there in Austin. You shake in the seats as they're riding the sandworms. And it's cool, but you're exactly right. It's not engaging your brain in the same way as doing all of those things in your head. There's something special about it, right? Like, we're not evolved to read, but it's this co-evolutionary thing. Like, it's hard. We have to hijack parts of our brain that were evolved to do other things. We have to hijack them and basically force them to do this very unnatural thing. But once we do, it works so synergistically with us. Like, it's one of these accidents, cultural discovery accidents, that this thing, which is very unnatural and humans aren't evolved to do, we have to really train for years.
Whoa. This is not natural and humans aren't evolved to do?
We're not evolved to read. Reading, we have to hijack portions of the brain that are used and evolved to do other things, and through painstaking training, essentially rewire them to convert written letters into semantic meaning, right? I mean, the written word, and this is so recent, we're talking 10,000 years or less, and humans have been around for 300,000 years in roughly their modern genetic state, right?
Right.
So it is really arbitrary. Whereas even something like speaking in language, it's more like 50 to 80,000 years old. Writing's pretty new. but it works really well. It's like one of these cultural discoveries that has stuck because it's not just useful. Our brain takes to it in a really interesting way. The way that like we imagine the scenes and the impact we get out of it and its ability to change our cognitive states. It's like discovering, they talk about how like the cavemen discovered beer by accident. And they're like, this is awesome. That's sort of what reading has been like for our species.
Wow, that's amazing. And plus the 10,000 years ago was the Advent, but really, Gutenberg's printing press was maybe 500 years ago when it was actually able to be mass distributed. There are stories. I have a book called The Book, and there are stories of like, I think it's Marcus Aurelius, like the first time he read in his mind and people were watching him, like he wasn't like talking the words.
Yep.
He was just reading it in his, people were like, what's he doing? Why is he just stand there? Why is he just looking at? Like no one knew what that even was as an idea that you could just sit there and look at something and read.
Yeah, I have an interior monologue. Like, what is going on here? Yeah, I think Augustine, they used to say that about him as well. Yeah.
Maybe that's who it was. I mean, that is giving us some great fuel for 3 books, the podcast, because here I have thought that it is like we're in the books category, we're in the literature category, we're in the like tiny infinitesimally small subset of society. Jonathan Franzen, guest on the show, says I'm part of a declining species of the literary community. He kind of jokes like that. But meanwhile, you're giving us some contemporary like freshness here. Like there is a new thing that you know how to read. It is a new thing that you can do this great thing. You are rewiring your brain to transplant yourself into 3 different places every single time we have our conversation. So with that wonderful, beautiful set of appetizers that you've given us with, Cal, I really appreciate that. Why don't we dive into now your 3 most formative books? For each one, I'm going to hold it up to the camera for those watching on YouTube. And for those not watching on YouTube, I will describe it as if you're holding it in the store. That's my goal. I'll give like a 30 to 60 second overview of the book. And I'll ask you, Cal, to tell us about your relationship with each book. And then I have a few follow-up questions for each one.
Yeah, sounds good.
Let's kick it off with Getting Things Done by David Allen. That's Allen, published by Penguin Books in 2001. The cover's got a picture of David Allen, who looks kind of like Niles Crane from Frasier, if you know that character. It's got a white background, blue border across the top of the check mark next to the word done, depending on what cover. Mine has it by the word getting. And so David Allen, born in 1945, he's an American author and productivity consultant who created the time management method, Getting Things Done. After graduate school, interestingly, I wanted to just mention this, Allen began using heroin and was briefly institutionalized. He claims to have had 35 professions before age 35. In Getting Things Done, Allen shares the breakthrough methods for stress-free performance with the simple premise of our productivity is directly proportional to our ability to relax. He shows us how to bullet point list, apply the do it, delegate, defer it, drop it rule to get your inbox to empty, reassess goals to stay focused in changing situations, plan projects as well as get them unstuck, overcome feelings of confusion, anxiety, and feeling overwhelmed, and feel fine about what you are not doing. Dewey Decimal Heads, you can file this book under 646.7. Interesting subcategory. It's technology / home and family management / sewing, clothing, management of personal life / management of personal life. Cal / Calvin, tell us about your relationship with Getting Things Done by David Allen.
Well, first of all, for the audience that's listening, Neil, don't you miss that period where they did covers like that? So it's David Allen with his arms kind of crossed and the contemplative hand on the chin,
wearing a 3-piece suit.
This was like the 1980s and 90s. You used to get these book covers where you would just say a full size picture of the author standing, like a full body shot in like a dramatic kind of like, hey, pose. Miss those eras.
Yeah, there's like 1 finger on the cheek, 3 curled around on the chin.
Oh, such classic. And I'll say, by the way, he's a fascinating guy. So I kind of profiled him, but really like profiled the book. In the New Yorker in 2021, I wrote this article called The Rise and Fall of Getting Things Done. And so I really kind of went deep then. He's a weird, interesting guy, which is important, actually, because when I think about that book's influence on me, there's 2 waves of it, right? So there's going to be the influence it had when I first encountered it in college when it came out. And there's the influence.
2001.
Yes. And I read it, I listened to it on tape. And back then, I probably downloaded it. This was pre-Audible, so I probably like paid $30 and downloaded it, onto my iPod. Then there's a new residence that we can get into more recently, where the cultural reaction and misunderstanding of getting things done and what that book was really about has a new resonance that I think is also very important. But in
I want the full relationship.
Oh yeah, I have a long relationship with Allen and everything. I've spent an unhealthy amount of time probably thinking and writing about David Allen. So when I get to this book, when I first encountered this book, I'm in college, 2001, 2002. I would have read it, and so I would have been like a sophomore or junior. The thing that jumped out at me about it was this idea of being systematic about how you're organizing stuff in your own life, which was an idea that sort of appealed to me. Like I had read Stephen Covey, and Stephen Covey had the quads and trying to work backwards from your roles to figure out like what you should prioritize. There was a sort of a late 80s.
Yeah, time versus urgency, Eisenhower matrix.
This is all Covey. So he was doing that. There were some characters around like Brian Tracy that was sort of more not aphorism based, but like Eat the Frog, sort of a maxim based time management, like do the hard thing first. And Allen came along and was very systematic. He's like, you have a flow chart. This you make a decision here, here, and here. This goes on this list. You execute from that. It kicked off this movement in the 2000s that became known in leet speak and sort of online parlance as productivity prawn, PR, $, which was this belief. And by the way, my New Yorker editor at the time was so pleased that we got the word productivity prawn, which is this like ultimate geek term, into the pages of the New Yorker back when I wrote about David Allen
being a play on the word porn.
A play on the word porn, and you write it in a way that it's not going to be. It has to do with like it won't be filtered by the early like content filters. But what it was like productivity porn, they call it prawn. There's this big movement, this big optimistic movement in the 2000s that with the right system supported by software, work could become effortless. Like that this was going to liberate work from being this sort of like relatively like confusing hard thing of like, what am I working on? That you would have the right software running the right systems, and like a lot of the organization of work would be automated algorithmically. You'd be outsourcing this sort of energy dispersal required to make decisions into systems, and work would become this much more effortless thing. You get the right system and your work was going to be better. And I interviewed some of the creators of one of the big tools that built on getting things done. This was super appealing to me when I was 20, 21 years old, right? It felt new, it felt fresh, and you see this influence for sure in How to Become a Straight A Student, my second book, where I'm really walking students through, like, you need to be systematic about how you're approaching your schoolwork. Like how are you doing it? You need to write down, like, what's your GTD? Like, you need to write down, this is how I'm taking notes. This is how I'm studying papers.
What's your GTD?
Like systems mattered, right?
Yeah.
And so that idea that systems matter is very important. I went on a student systems quest starting my sophomore year, right around the time I encountered this, where I had gone through my freshman year and had gotten pretty good but not great grades. Inspired in part by getting things done, if I have this timeline right in my mind, I began aggressively experimenting on myself with how I was doing student work, like the systems I was using. I treated it like David Allen treated knowledge work time management. How am I taking notes? How am I studying for a test? And it was transformative. Like what happened is my grades maxed out, 4.0, 4.0, 4.0. Every quarter starting my sophomore fall, suddenly I was getting a 4.0 until my senior spring where I got 1A minus. It was like a 3-year span with 1A minus. Like everything else was an A.
And so the system worked.
The systems worked. And I evolved them, and let me try this. So this is stupid. That's a waste of time. Let me try this. And so, man, I was a believer in systems by the time I left college. And it infuses my early books for sure, infuses the stuff I do now. David Allen was the person who really introduced this idea of you can have a system. You can have a system for how you do things. And that system can make things better. And you can let the system take on a lot of the work of hey, what should I do next? Or how should I do this? A system could make your life easier. Like I never pulled an all-nighter in college once I got systematic about my studies. Like it could make your life easier. I had to study less time than other people. I was more relaxed, you know?
And I don't want to go deep into your systems because they are very powerful, and I've heard you talk about them before. But for those that are earmarking this part of the conversation, what is the best place for them to go if they want to go into this part of your work? Is it how to be a straight A student?
Well, you know, it's every stage.
Should they listen to your conversation with, I think, Andrew Huberman, where you talk about this a lot?
It's every stage. Yeah. So if you look at how to become a straight A student, you'll see my student systems. If you look at So Good They Can't Ignore You, you'll see systems for transforming like choosing a job and making your career something that you're successful at. It's
you
throughout
got locked
everything.
in on systems in general. Those that want more can look at your early books, or more recently, I think your conversation with Andrew you went pretty deep on this there.
Yeah. Yeah. Or my podcast.
He's kind of a consummate learner.
Yeah, that was a systems conversation for sure. Well, what's his term? Protocols? I think that's what's the protocols. Yeah. So he keyed in on, it's funny how different people key in on different things. Like doing Ferris's show, like we usually key in when we talk on like the state of technology and its impact on society. Huberman is like, what's the protocols? Like, let's get that. It really
Rich
depends.
wants to know about your childhood.
Rich is like, how do we like, what's this all about, Cal? Like, you know, he'll like, he got into my interview with him. He's like, I think I'm doing too much. You know, like I'm kind of stressed out. And like, it's funny. Everyone has their angle.
And it's all self-oriented too, in some sense.
That's the secret to all media.
So David Allen, Cal Newport, part 1 in 2001, when you're a sophomore or a junior, is to ingrain into your brain this idea that this is how the world, this is one way of looking at the world. And when I apply this to my life, it seems to be working. Yeah.
Now there's going to be, this is why the article I eventually wrote about this was called The Rise and Fall of Getting Things Done. Because ultimately, I realized and had to evolve, like a lot of people who got into this, systems can't do everything. So that then became another important step as I moved on to graduate school and professional writing, right? And these were the two things I decided in college I wanted to do was computer science and writing. And this is what I was doing. I was at MIT studying computer science at the highest level and writing books, you know, and trying to become a better writer or whatever.
Yeah.
This is when I began to realize, systems can't get you all the way to impact. Systems can't get you to the meaningful life. Systems can help save energy.
Why'd you think that? Why'd you stop believing in the systems?
Well, and not only did I stop believing, I began becoming a target for David Allen fans for my heresy, because at the core of Allen's idea was this idea that all work gets reduced to widgets and categorized, and then you don't have to worry about anything. Work becomes this sort of Zen activity of just what context am I in? Take an action off a list that's been reduced to something you can do in a couple minutes and execute that. Then what's next? And I realized when it came to producing really meaningful things, that's not what that work feels like. That work is grappling with the muse. That work is like grappling day after day, hour after hour, trying to create something useful or beautiful. When I was solving a theorem or trying to write a book chapter, it's not next actions. And a system couldn't make the hard work easy. And I began to then think about like, these systems are maybe more about getting stuff out of the way.
Yeah.
So that you could grapple with the creative beast, which is like this hard, much more messier, beautiful type of thing. And so I had this interesting evolution during grad school.
Wow. That is really interesting. And it kind of makes me think a little bit of, it's weird that I have this, but it makes me think a little bit of this little 2x2 that I drew for myself, which is time versus importance. I think low time, low importance decisions, you got to automate them. Okay. Systemize them perhaps. High time, low importance decision like email. Yeah. You got to regulate it into like start maybe do an hour a day or whatever into one regular. For me and Leslie, it's like we have a little piece of paper on the inside of one of our kitchen cupboards. And so whenever a door is squeaky, a patio stone is wobbly, a light bulb, we just put it on that list. And then like one half day a month, I've invited her to an invite the last Saturday morning of the month, and we do all the house stuff. Do you know what I mean? So it's just regulated, right? Because it takes a long time, but it's not that important. Effectuate just means get it done, because I wanted a rhyming word that is like high importance, low time stuff, like saying hi to your team when you get to work, or like picking your kids up from daycare. And that all frees space to grapple with the muse / debate, which is the only word I could think of. That means the high time, high importance decision. Well, how interesting is that? It almost feels like you mentioned Tim Ferriss a couple times. Like, isn't that interesting? Like, I almost see that slow evolution, because he's been a very systems guy, 4-hour work week. You can almost see that evolution with lots of people lots of our contemporaries. I throw myself happily in this mix. Like, you get to the point where you're like, I just want to read poetry.
Yeah, well, here's the interesting thing about Tim. So I wrote a profile, like a mini profile of him for the New Yorker, where I was talking about how like he got misunderstood, or maybe he evolved. And I interviewed him about this, so like I could kind of get his take on it. But like the thing with Tim is, I was saying, look, he wrote this book, The 4-Hour Work Week, which should be like the handbook for 2020, 2021, right? I mean, it was like he was ahead of the time of like thinking about work and
came out in
meaning.
2007.
Yeah, and it was like perfectly fit for that time of how do you integrate and reduce the footprint of work and do these other sorts of things.
Freelance, bootstrap, remote work.
Yeah. So you could, how do you design your life, right? And everyone was thinking about this, and yet the book was getting no play. And I wrote this New Yorker piece, like, why are we not all talking about this book? And I talked to Tim about it, and it was weird. Everyone honed in that book on the automation and the systems. And you talk to Tim then and now, he was like, well, this was all about, it was about me being in Argentina and learning the tango and going and enjoying the wine. It was about me traveling it was about freeing you up to do the stuff you would normally wait to do when you were retired. He's like, so he was like, the hacks almost don't matter in that book. It was like, the thing is, if you're clever, you can free up a lot of time for what he called mini retirements. And it was completely misunderstood, or people cued in on Ferriss is all about how do you do things, like what are the shortcuts and how do you do things faster?
Because the left brain scratching parts of this book were so scratchy for those left brain people, but that bigger holistic living thing was we were all young alpha. A lot of people targeted in that book were like young alpha males looking to like make $1 million or whatever, right? So
but then and then he told me, and then he got captured by a little bit. He wrote a couple books. Like, great, well then I'll just talk about the hack stuff, like what works for your body, what works, with learning, with the 4-Hour Chef, and then you're like, okay, enough of this. And he is like, podcasting's more interesting, So it was interesting, but that's another microcosm of the systems are very appealing. But like the systems by themselves. And that's how the whole productivity prawn movement collapsed, is eventually people discovered the systems help, but they don't give me meaning in my work. They're not important. They're not getting me fired up. Having a kinkless GTD setup built on top of OmniFocus, optimized to the hilt, is not making me happier. I like twiddling with it, but it's not making me happier. It's this interesting evolution a lot of people go through from systems as the theology of work to sort of systems as like one of the things you deploy to get to what matters.
Ooh, that's fascinating.
So teleology, I said that wrong.
What was the word?
I said theology, but I think I meant teleology.
How do you spell it?
Teology. The intrinsic purpose of.
That might be the word of the chapter. Keep going. How do you? I want to get this teleology.
Teleology. Now you have me nervous that I'm saying it wrong. This is the
explanation of phenomena in terms of the purpose they serve, rather than the cause by which they arise.
Yeah, it's like an Aristotelian idea.
Teleology. Does that sound right to you?
That could be right.
Okay, because at the end of every chapter of the show, from way back into chapter 1, we have a word of the chapter. With chapter 18 and David Sedaris, the word was Lilliputian. Typically, the word is a word that I have never heard before.
Lilliputian, referring to Gulliver's Travels and the little people.
You got it.
Yeah, sure.
Because I asked him about his height, because over his New York Times profiles over the years, it was like he kept getting taller. It was like...
Oh, interesting. He realized you could lie. Like, it doesn't really matter. Yeah.
Well, and the reporters maybe, these were as diminutive or tiny, a tiny man. And then as he got more famous, it was like his height disappeared from his profiles. It was interesting.
Oh, interesting.
So he laughed and said, I was once called Lilliputian.
Well, so here's what's good about that term then. And by the way, this is a common thing of people who read a lot and writers is we say words wrong because we just see these words in our head all the time. We're not talking to people. We're thinking about things. Even now I will get common things wrong. And my wife will be like, that's not how you pronounce that word. And I'm like, I've been a professional writer my whole life. I'm in my head,
Yeah. That's why one of the best pieces of advice to ever give anybody who's written a book is read the whole book out loud.
Oh yeah.
Read your whole book out loud.
Which I did for the book on tape for the first time for Slow Productivity. And man, that's a process.
Oh, for the first time?
First time.
First time? Why first time?
Because it's a pain. I don't,
So you said no to doing audio for Deep Work and for digital minimalism and for A World Without Email. And and this is 4 years ago. These are recent big audio world. You said no thanks? Yeah.
Now, World Without Email, it was easier to say no because it was in the pandemic. And so they were like, it's hard. Like the studios aren't really open. And but yeah, I'd always said no. It sounded like too hard. But then when Slow Productivity came out, they're like, you have a podcast. Like people know what your voice sounds like now. Sorry, you have to do it.
Oh, wow. You were still saying no.
It's a pain. I really don't like it. But it was really useful and interesting. But by the way, I don't know if you've had this experience. You come away being like, this writing is trash. When you're forced to read it slowly, you're like, I'm a terrible writer. That's how you come away.
You want to edit it the whole time you're reading it. That's exactly why it's so good to read your own book out loud. James Fry, who is the author of A Million Little Pieces and was our guest back in chapter, I got to get this right, as 18. James.
That's a deep poll. James Fry, sure.
James Fry, chapter 30. I'm getting it wrong. He said he talks while he writes. He reads every sentence as he writes it. He can't write in a room at a coffee shop because he's talking as he writes. He's saying the sentence. Now, of course, he might with fiction be writing a little bit more.
He might have adjusted dialogue. The song a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, but still, it's an interesting point. So I get your relationship with David Allen's Getting Things Done when you were, in your, I think, second last year of college. Yeah. And I get that there was a kind of when you got to the exposure that grappling with the muse was kind of a bigger thing. So did we get to what your relationship is with it today?
No, there's been another chapter. There's another chapter. All right. So then there's this other chapter, which is what the book tells us about our culture and our understanding of productivity. And this is a little bit more recent. So like one of the interesting things about that book is it comes up in pop culture. Like, for example, there's an episode of The Office where Daryl holds it up as like reading, getting things done, right? And it's referenced a lot as well. It's often referenced.
Everyone knows this book.
Or they know it.
In the business book world, this is maybe one of the top 5 most well-known books with How to Win Friends and Influence People, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, this book, and one of each of ours.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of my biggest triumphs, at least for like that version of myself, is the point when finally Deep Work consistently started topping Getting Things Done on the time management list, and that was like my biggest. That's just been the last 2 or 3 years. That's been my biggest accomplishment. But it's used in culture. It's also used in a lot of critiques of productivity, a lot of critiques of work, a lot of critiques of capitalism. This book is often referenced because the title indicates, they don't know about the book, but the title indicates that this book is about doing more things. Because you see that title, right? And so it's become a stand-in for how a lot of people understand productivity culture. It's like the goal, there's all these people like David Allen saying, how do you do more things? How do you optimize to get more things done? That's exactly how Daryl on The Office referenced it. He's like, I'm trying to be more efficient about how we run the office because I'm reading Getting Things Done. The interesting thing about this book is that's not what it's about. The book, David Allen has no interest in getting more things done in the sense of like increasing the rate at which you accomplish things, being more impressive, trying to get ahead. The book is instead, here's my take on the book now, it represents a huge discontinuity in the business productivity literature that's very important for understanding how the world of business shifted right around that time period. If you go back to like Stephen Covey, First Things First, 7 Habits, it's like late 80s, early 90s, you have like a very optimistic approach to productivity, It's all about self-actualization. It believes that you can figure out like the optimal things to do to achieve all your goals and all the roles in your life. It's like very positive. David Allen is not. It's actually, and I didn't notice this when I was 20, but I noticed it today very glaringly, a very nihilistic book. Like in this book, David Allen is basically saying, we're drowning. And what is our goal here? What is the goal of this book? Is to try to find cognitive peace amid an unstoppable onslaught of things to do. That is his goal. That's why it's the art of stress-free productivity, not the art of doing really good things, not the art of getting ahead, not the art of accomplishing your goals or getting promoted. Stress-free productivity. All he wants is cognitive peace. And the whole system is about how do you get stuff out of your head where it's making you stressed out and get it like in the paper where you trust it. And it's nihilistic. He wants work to be this almost dystopian, like cranking widgets thing. So at least you don't have to be stressed by all the stuff you have to do. You can just sort of in a mechanical way zone out and just do this, do that, do this, and like let your brain get some breathing room. So it's like a nihilistic book almost. And I think this is very important because what happens between Stephen Covey and David Allen, it's the front office IT revolution. It's computers, it's networks, it's emails, it's mobile computing. That's what's different between 1994 and 2001. And what Allen is reacting to, he's like right there at the very beginning of this wave, is how once we all got connected to digital devices in the office, the amount of work on our plate and the speed and velocity at which this came at us, and we had to talk about it, just exploded. And he's there at D-Day, seeing the troops come on the beach, riding from the front lines. That is what I realized today getting things done is. It is an observation, dispatches from the catastrophe. He was right there at the moment that knowledge work changed.
So now you see it as a nihilistic book.
A milestone that marks this sharp discontinuity in the world of work. And by the way, look at every major business bestseller productivity-related book after that, like in the 2010s. They're all about fighting overload and finding focus. It's essentialism. It's one thing. It's my book, Deep Work. All of these books.
Even Atomic Habits could be labeled that way.
Yeah.
Through the pandemic, when the book came out, everyone was looking in their wildly messy, Netflix-addled, endlessly screened lives. How do I frickin' stop drinking Coke?
How do I?
Maybe that Habits book will help me.
Hey, that'll maybe get me there. But
how do I stop scrolling TikTok?
But the bigger point here is when you hear almost anyone, any modern writer, especially in like the elite media world where I also play, when they're writing about productivity culture or work, they set up this straw man that's just not true. They set up this straw man of like everyone is saying that you should hustle and like get more done and optimize your day. We haven't seen a book like that in like 25 years.
Oh, that's interesting.
Everything since David Allen on has been fighting back against the onslaught, the distraction, the overload. How do you just find a thing that's important and do that? How do you avoid getting dragged into too many commitments? How do you make sure in the that's the theme of all of these books.
So then what's pushing us the other way? Capitalism?
It's not capitalism because we've had capitalism for a long time. We had capitalism in 1970 and knowledge workers weren't worried about this. We had capitalism in 1989 when Covey was writing and we weren't worried about being overloaded. Here's what I think it is. So we had, in knowledge work in particular, and this comes from the Slow Productivity book, but the rough heuristic we were using for thinking about productivity was what I call pseudo-productivity, which is like, hey, visible activity is going to just be our proxy for useful effort. Like if I see you doing something that's good, if you want to be more productive, like stay later at the office.
Because we were going from the Industrial Revolution where you could put a screw in a tire on the Ford line, and that was our proxy as knowledge work kind of came into being.
Yeah, exactly. So in that assembly line, we could be very precise. We could measure cars produced per labor hour. We could have numbers and charts. And all that fell apart in knowledge work because it's messier and more ambiguous. So we're just like, we'll just use we'll gather in a building and like make sure that we see each other working. I argue, this is my big contention, because most of my thinking of the last 10 years of writing has really been about the story of different places that technology disrupts things than how we react to that. Because I'm a computer scientist, I care about that. I think it was the combination of pseudo-productivity, which had been in place since the late 1950s, the combination of that with the front office IT revolution that sparked this spiraling burnout crisis that we saw the first signs of in David Allen and by the pandemic had basically reached a point of epidemic proportions, not to reuse that term, but it got really bad. It's technology, these new technologies, plus this old idea of using pseudo productivity to measure your usefulness in the office. Those two things did not play nice to each other. Like the whole first part of slow productivity is arguing that created this spiral of increasing like overload and frustration, and it made knowledge work increasingly unbearable.
Wow. You're a dad.
Yes.
You've got kids. 3, I believe.
3 boys, yes.
All boys. Yeah, I'm also a father of all boys. And your age range is?
We have 5 about to turn 6 on the young side and 11 at the old side.
Mm-hmm. And you are at the forefront of a lot of things. Podcasting world, the writing world, I think the digital kind of future gazing kind of world. And we are also experiencing a cultural tipping point at the same time as this is happening with Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, which is just out and killing it.
Yeah.
And there are movements around the world. My wife and I have been working on a book proposal with my age right now on like a manifesto on smartphone-free childhoods, like a mother talking to a child. Like, what are your internal family Newport principles, rules, ideas on screens and cell phones and smartphones with your 5 to 11-year-old kids?
Yeah, well, they're all exactly aligned with John's work because I've known John for a long time and I've written about him and he's kept me up to speed on the research he's been looking at. And so
you're a paid member of After Babel Substack.
I am a paid member of After Babel Substack. That's absolutely true. I actually have given a couple talks at my kids' school about kids and phones. That's all me just basically summarizing John's research.
Right. So he's a friend of the show as well, and we did a nice chat over his wife's Korean food in his kitchen.
So he's right. I think he is right that unrestricted internet access, when is it appropriate for someone to get unrestricted internet access? The safe answer is 16. And the culture's not there yet, but I think we're like a year or 2 away from that being a very common thing. Just like we're like, yeah, probably a 17-year-old shouldn't drink alcohol. Like when we kind of made that decision in the 70s, or we should really care about kids smoking. You know, we made that decision. We got serious about that in the 80s and 90s. I think we're going there culturally with smartphones, unrestricted smartphone access to kids. 16 is where the research is pointing.
Really? It's not 21?
Well, that maybe be better, but the key thing about 16, like John would point out, is that you're through puberty. And like that's critical. So you've gone through that very malleable developmental period. You have a more stable sense of self and identity at that point. Like you don't want, while you're trying to establish a sense of yourself and identity, to also be exposed to algorithms. Like that leads to weird places. Also, your social setup, your social structures are all relatively strongly in place. By the time you're that age, you're like, here's who I am, here's who my friends are, here's what I'm involved in. I have a pretty stable sense of self. My emotional regulation is not quite as dynamic as it was when I was 12 or 13.
I must have been a late bloomer. I gotta say.
Yeah,
I didn't hit this till at least 5 more years, if not more.
Well, but at least it's better, right?
Yeah,
post-puberty than
certainly better than 10. Yeah, for sure.
So that's why John's been pushing 16. Right. And I think that makes sense. The Surgeon General has also pushed that age. It's
Murphy,
Murphy's been pushing that age. It's sort of emerging. Some of the new legislation, state and there's national state legislation all over right now. Think about these issues. But we're seeing more, like the bill that was just passed in Florida basically says no social media 13 or younger, which all the way was the law already, but an unenforced federal law. But what the Florida Act added was under 16, but above 13, there has to be parental consent. So like, you know, someone has to say you're allowed to use this. So I think 16 is becoming a de facto threshold when thinking about these services.
What about you? What about your family? When are you going to get your kids' phones? That's kind of what I'm asking.
Yeah, well, there's
What's your screen time policy at home? What's your video game rules?
Yeah, so there's multiple different things going on here. To me, phone is a misnomer. It's unrestricted internet access. That's the danger, right? So we have to be really clear. So unrestricted internet access, 16. So that would mean, for example, having a smartphone that you can just use. That's got to be 16. Having a phone as a communication device, let's say a phone that doesn't have a smartphone screen, but you can do text messages on it, or a watch, you can do text messages. The policy there is if there's a demonstrated logistical need, then you can get one of those. If it is, okay, you're doing all these sports and it'd be very convenient if you could let us know like what time practice is going to be over, then we can get you a device that does that. We don't have to let that narrow need lead us to say, okay, here's your iPhone, go, get after it.
Do kids have devices now?
Well, they don't have any telephonic or internet connected devices. On video games, I'm very worried about any video game, looking at the research, especially with boys. Anything that's connected to the internet, I'm very worried about. Anything you didn't have to pay $50 for the game, I'm very worried about, because they're getting their money. And if you didn't pay for the game, where are they getting their money? Through making you addicted to it so they can upsell you on things. So for our kids, for the video games, they have Nintendo Switches.
That's what we have too.
And I think that's absolutely fine.
Plural. We only have one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They fight otherwise. So I think Nintendo is fine. So it's interesting how this has shifted. And this is part of the confusion in this field.
You're pro Mario Kart.
I'm pro Mario Kart. I'm pro Zelda. Pro air conflicts. I'm trying to think what they play.
What about time? Do you have a time restriction?
Yeah, of course.
No?
There's only certain times they get to use it. And it's not fair. They get to use it on like Saturday morning, and they can win a half hour if they do like enough chores. They don't get very much time on
it. They can win a half an hour if they do enough chores.
Point systems, yeah.
And what's the chore? Oh, so number of time you do on a chore?
You get various points for doing various things. Yeah. So you have different things you can cast the points
gold.
For. Yeah. Yeah, that's positive reinforcement theory, right? That when you can positively reinforce good behavior, actually that's like very compelling to kids, and points are a good way of doing it.
So you start with like 2 hours, you got screens, which is like largely video games. Maybe they watch TV with the parents, that's not counting, but the solo screen time thing for 6 to 11-year-olds in the Newport household, and I'll happily share mine as well. I've got boys 3 to 9, 4 boys, 3, 5, 7, and 9. And we have a currently under negotiation screen time contract, which says everybody gets 20 tickets per week. The tickets are worth half an hour each. That's actually, just for 10 and up. So they look forward to that. Then it's like 16 tickets at this age, 12 tickets at this age, 10 tickets at this age. I think the baby is like still under our purview. Yeah. And the tickets can only be used Wednesday's music practice day. So you got to have your 4 music practices in. If your music practices are in by the Tuesday, you can start using your screen time on Tuesday. There is a screen time window per day. It's 3 to 6 p.m. That's like the after school time before the like bedtime. And it's kind of sounding similar. I mean, and by the way, my kids wrote this up. Like it's like in their writing on a piece of paper with scratches on it. So we're negotiating it now. It's like a live in process work.
Yeah.
I hesitate on how kind of like it sounds totally insane, but I'm happy to hear that you do something too like this.
No, it's simpler. I mean, for us, basically there's very little. You're not going to play a video game during the week except for some special occasions. So it's like weekend mornings and long car trips.
Yeah.
And like some special occasions. I mean, what I like about Nintendo games too is they're not super addictive. They're hard. And they're fun, but you also kind of get bored after a while. For a while, we didn't realize this at first. But we were going on a flight somewhere, so we put some games on an iPad. Yeah, like the iPad Arcade, and our youngest, when he was like playing these iPad Arcade games, it was very different than Nintendo. It was like he couldn't control himself, and so and he's like, I have to get this back, and but like the Nintendo
Candy Crush Saga-esque.
Yeah, with the Nintendo, when you're like, okay, you're done playing Nintendo. It's like when we played Nintendo as kids. Like, oh, it's too bad. It's like watching a TV show you like, but you don't get that reaction you get when the kids is on the sort of networked game that's made to be addictive, where they're like yelling at you and like, this is my digital crack. That makes me nervous. So we're very careful about what games. And then we don't worry as much about TV. We watch TV as a family. I'm a cinephile. We watch a lot of movies together. They don't get a lot of time just watching TV on their own. But it's interesting how this changed. Like when we first had our first kid back in 2012, the concern was still the APA talking about screen time. They meant TV, right? They meant like watching or content. Passively watching content. Like that was the big concern all of the young millennial parents had, was like, how much TV time should my kid watch? And by 2017 that had shifted, like, forget TV. TV is nothing. What you care about is interactive screen and internet. That's where the damage is being caused. So it's interesting how these things shift, where without anything else to worry about, we used to worry like, what if our 3-year-old sees too much Sesame Street? That's not the concern now. Now the concern is the 13-year-old with the iPad in their room. And, it's like, put it into my veins. God knows what they're doing. And if you try to take it away, they're going to have an aneurysm.
Amen. And two things to add in. One is a physiological, and one is an aha. The aha, or the underscored point. It's just, look at what Cal is doing. He's evaluating the business model of the platform. So if it's an online, free game that is badge oriented versus a $50, you buy the Legend of Zelda in a box, which we just did. Yeah. That's a really sharp and astute way to evaluate what you like, because I thought that's amazing. And then physiologically, I just wanted to say, I took my kids to the eye doctor recently, and she's like, how much screen time do they get? And I was like, I don't know, 3 hours a week. And she's like, 3 hours a day or 3 hours a week? I was like, well, I don't know, maybe 4 hours a week, but it's a week, And she's like, and what's the screen time? I was like, 1 hour on TV. She's like, that doesn't count. I was like, what do you mean it doesn't count? She's like, from an ophthalmological perspective, the TV does not count as any screen time. It's the shrunken, tiny, close to your face stuff. That's the problem.
Yep.
You knew this. I did not. So we're getting a big screen TV. Daddy was against it. We were all sitting on the couch watching laptops. Turns out I was the one that was making the mistake.
You need the big screen. And let me tell you what else you need to do, right? Okay. Get the big screen TV. Get the Sonos Arc as your front speaker, and get the Sonos subwoofer. Those two things alone can give you a close to cinematic sound experience.
Wow. Which is Sonos Arc, Sonos Sub. Okay.
Oh yeah. And you got to get the sub. And you can add 2 more Sonos small speakers if you want the full 5-point surround. You don't really need it. The Arc is very good, but the Arc plus the sub with a nice, crisp, big screen TV, you can get a really close to cinematic experience in your house. And let's be honest, that's the whole key for all of this, is that so you and I can enjoy movies better.
That's funny.
Yeah.
That's funny. Speaking of movies, and speaking of this, one last question, getting things done. We're going to go to your second book after this. I know the first one we're taking a little bit longer, but here's the thing. I got to ask you about your relationship with your face. Your relationship with your face. All right. And the reason I'm asking about this is because Seth Godin told us in chapter 3 of the show that his book, Permission Marketing, which came out in 2000, he says was the very first business book in this category that featured a business author's face on the cover. Yeah. Now, I know you mentioned the front suit kind of, that look. Well, David Allen in this 2001 book, he's featured on the cover. Your face isn't on the cover of any. Yeah. So Cal Newport books do not have a Cal Newport face on them. Okay. And we also, both you and I, operate in the world of podcasts, for example. I have gone one way. I had my face on the 3 Books logo. I took it off. I don't like being recognized. I don't like the surprise. I know you and I want to talk to you. I don't like that feeling. That happened to me a lot with my first book, and I just I have this disorienting effect when I feel like I'm being, does that person know who I am? And they're looking at me and I just don't like that. Ryan Holiday did not have his face on the Daily Stoic podcast. Now he's added it. You know what I'm saying? So it seems like everybody's constantly exploring their relationship with their face. A lot of people, again, mutual friends, let's mention Sahil Bloom, Shane Parrish, Ramit Sethi, they go to the same photographer for their profile pic, which is then the same kind of perfect profile pic on across all your social media handles and across all your podcast logos and across all your email newsletters and all this. And I'm like, what's going on? I need your crystal ball again. What's going on with your relationship with your face, my relationship, our relationship with our faces in general? What is happening here? I'm disoriented in this world. And
I'm uncomfortable with this world too. I preferred the model where Cal Newport is almost like an abstraction. It's like this. We know these ideas in this book, and there's this entity, Cal Newport. I don't know if it's a real person or not. I just sort of associate this abstraction with these particular type of ideas, and that really has changed recently in the sense that visual branding seems to be just part of the new media landscape. That when people hear you and see you, I guess they have a different relationship with you, that sort of parasocial relationship that I guess is positive for selling books. But I'm not, this is all new to me. I'm like you. I don't want people to recognize me. I don't want people to really know much about me. I don't want that really, but it seems to be the way the whole media world shifted it. When I got started, it was like blogging and newsletters was new media. And that was that could be pretty impersonal, right? It was the ideas. It was the columnist model. It was like, I don't know anything about David Brooks other than his ideas. He's a guy for the New Yorker, Tom Friedman. I think he has a mustache. That's all I know.
And he might have grown a beard after that. So that the picture might just have been for that. I've always thought, like, if I had to get a picture for the paper, I would make it different than the real, than the real me.
Yeah. So
but this is, to your point, I like how you're uncomfortable with it. I like how you're sort of sitting here with me. And I want to just insert a couple more data points for us both. Okay. Andrew Wilkinson said on Twitter, "You want to be Coen Brothers famous, the absolute top of your craft, but nobody has a clue what you look like."
Yes.
This is years ago. James Clear responded. He doesn't really respond much. He responded, "Agree, period. I want a brand that is known by name, not by face. Examples, Calvin Klein, Kate Spade. Most people know the name. 99% of them couldn't recognize the face." Now let's insert into here the Instagramification. Like, if you've ever talked to anybody who like wants to grow your Instagram profile, I know you don't. I know you're not on social media, and I respect you and I love you, and I hate social media, and I desperately shouldn't be on it. And you're right, I don't do anything with it, and I don't have the apps and blah blah blah. But I have post the new podcast is out. Come check. So I'm still doing that kind of stuff. But if you're talking to them, what they always tell me is, they don't know you. You aren't sharing your 4 a.m. ice baths and your like 9 a.m. putting your kids to bed, and your kids we don't know what your kids look like, Neil, and we don't know what your wife looks like. And I'm like, I know. And they're like, well, that's what you're going to have to do if you want to get bigger. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, so there's Andrew Wilkinson and James Clear on one side, Coen Brothers famous, Calvin Klein, right? Mary Kay, right? James Clear arguably is a face people don't know, right? It's not, his face is not all over his stuff. And then there's what I've heard you just say, it seems to be the culture now. And that is, I think, where most of us live in. And so do we just got to live with it? Can we rail against this? Should we take our faces off of everything? What's up? What's going like?
I'm still trying to figure this out. I think it is a good question. Like the argument, the new media argument is, if people have more of a personalized relationship with you, I suppose they're more interested in what you're doing. Right. And they'll be more loyal. They'll buy the books or this, that. I don't know if that's true or not.
Humans are rare, scarce.
Yeah.
There's no face on the front of Amex.
That's true. Yeah. There's no face. So I don't know. I don't know how this is going to shake out. Like, I'm more visual now than I used to be because it's really the podcast that had to make me more available, because in the podcast, you're in someone's ear. And then once you're doing a podcast, you do want a visual component to it, because people just, if you're going to do it, people consume these in different ways. So now you're visually out there. The thing that first got me occasionally recognized was just book tours, because all of these other podcasters who I used to just call into from my home built these studios, and I had to like fly around and go to these places. Aww. It was after Digital Minimalism. That was really the first time.
Do you pay for that, or do they pay for you?
It's a mix. Usually it's those tours, it's the publisher is paying for the tour.
Okay. I was just curious when you start creating a podcast, because I heard your rant on like the $6,000 like Rich Roll studio versus the like $250,000 CBS studio. I thought that was a great point that you made.
Yeah.
You didn't say Rich Roll, you said Malibu, but I kind of figured it was Rich.
That might have been Rich. Yeah. So anyways, I don't know. It's weird. I mean, I've talked to Rich about this too. He said it got weird once he was on YouTube. Like, people recognize him now. I don't know how it's going to shake out. I mean, here's the thing is, I think there is the reason why people are more visible. I don't know about the sharing personal details piece. That I think is a social media artifact. And I think that is maybe not as important as people say. I'll talk about some of my systems. I'll mention like what we do with my kids and screen time. But like, for example, my wife is not a character.
I purposely didn't ask you their names.
I don't say their names. I have an agreement with my wife that she didn't opt into this world, so I don't talk about her. I don't give her name. She doesn't want to be discussed. She didn't opt into this world. And I don't talk a lot about non-professional things other than like interests, like movies. So I don't know if that's true. I don't think you have to be, let me let you into the details. That's a very modern thing. This idea, it's a very YouTube, Instagram, TikTok thing of, we're going to form a connection by me being vulnerable and sort of like being honest and expressing like what I'm worried about. And that I think might be more faddish. I do think a visual connection with people, this is why TV dominated radio. It's like people like the newscaster. I don't know anything about Dan Rather, but I like that I can see him. There's all these points of visual information.
JFK over Richard Nixon in the debate.
So I do think, at least if you're doing new media, that by new media, I mean, not books, but, you know, something digital, you're online, it's inevitably going to have a sort of video, you're a personality point to it. But what I'm trying to do is still keep myself as a professional presence online and try to keep the rest of my life separate.
This is great. My current thinking on this, by the way, is if you work for it, you can find it. But if you don't work for it, you can't. So I've taken my face off my books. Even my most recent book, I purposely don't have my face on. I've taken my face off my podcast. I've taken my face off my social media. Like my Twitter thing is like not my face. Yeah. And yeah, I'm doing live speeches. Here I am on a video podcast. So that's what I'm saying. It's like if you want to like find out what it looks like, I'm not going to hide it from you. Yeah. But I'm not going to push my face out at you.
Yes.
So that I can do what Jonathan Franzen told us, which is I want to be able to ride the subway unmolested.
Jonathan Franzen famous. That's how we should describe it, right? Yes, people don't really know what he looks like, but he's incredibly well respected. Chris Nolan, that's the other example. Yeah. He's the king of his medium right now. Most people don't know what Chris Nolan looks like. He could walk into a restaurant and no one's gonna be like, "Oh my God, is Chris?" I mean, in LA they would, but like out here in DC, he could walk into a restaurant. I agree. Right.
Everybody knows what Tarantino looks like.
Tarantino and James Cameron and Spielberg, they messed that up. They're too visual. We know what they look like, but they're kind of it. Like directors have it easy. Authors used to be this way. Like Michael Crichton. I bet a lot of people don't know what Michael Crichton looked like. Yeah. John Grisham. Yeah, he's a tall guy, 6'6", 6'5". John Grisham, I don't know if a lot of people know what John Grisham. Stephen King, maybe, you would know what he looks like, but you didn't know what writers look like. I bet a lot of people don't know what Malcolm, or they didn't know what Malcolm Gladwell looked like. I mean, maybe he's kind of distinctive looking.
Frizzy hair.
Yeah, when he did all the speaking. I don't know. I mean, talk about narrow problems, Neil.
No, I think it is broadly applicable though, because I think that if you're young and you're being told that you need to get out there and you need to bootstrap, and you need to hustle, and you need to freelance, there is this somehow algorithmically derived expectation that you need to front yourself, and we see it in negative ways, obviously, with like teens and sexting and so on and all that stuff. But I just wanted to get your pullback, and I got it, and I love it, and I appreciate it because I felt like a lone wolf on this thing.
No, and now I got to pile on for the young people. Also, all of what we're talking about, even like where you should be visual or not, all of that is given the prior of you have some craft that you're mastering and doing really well. It's just a matter of how are you going to be in the public after doing that, right? And so if you're young, forget all of that. All that matters is I need to build up the skill to do something really, really good that's really valuable. Then you can worry about, okay, now that like I'm doing great things, do I want to have my face on the book I wrote? Like that's the right question, because I think young people have been given this idea, this comes out of the social media companies themselves, that no, you can just directly alchemize like yourself, just being vulnerable and visible and open, that'll just alchemize somehow into being really valuable. That like that's actually the thing that makes you valuable and well known. And it's not the way it works. You still need craft. You still need
my gosh, that's a great phrase. Just being vulnerable and open and visual somehow alchemizes into valuable, and it doesn't.
That's the whole TikTok scam, right? Is like, how do they get people to post stuff to TikTok? Because they need a certain percentage of people posting stuff to TikTok. Well, because TikTok directly controls every video fed to every person, they just do this game. If you're a new creator on TikTok, where like on your third or fourth video, they throw like 10,000 views at you. And they give you this sense of just something about me is like really appealing. And I'm like right on the border of being like a superstar influencer. They feed your vanity. And now it's the cocaine pellet in the rat cage. You're like, I'm going to keep posting things on here. And then they'll give you another hit.
What's gonna do.
Yeah. Then like, here's 10 posts later, 7,000 views. You're like, oh my God, I'm so close. So it's a lottery mentality, right? This idea, it's like all the boys, my oldest son's age, have this idea of like, if I'm just playing Minecraft on YouTube, it might just like happen for me. And then because I know how to play Minecraft, I know how to talk about like I'm playing and so like, it's something anyone can do, and it could just lottery. And then you're like Captain Sparkles or whoever. I don't know who people listen to now. You're like this personality.
I have a lot I want to pile on to your pile on, and I'm going to hold myself back, but I think people get the general takeaway of what we're saying. I'll tell you a guy's face who most people don't know is Henry David Thoreau, the author of Walden. Originally published in 1854 by Ticknor and Fields in Boston. Everyone's cover of this book is different. I happen to have a version that has the introduction and annotations by Bill McKibben. So it's just like a bunch of kind of black and white sparse trees in the forest. I don't know what version you have. It just says Walden in the top in all caps in a highly kerned, heavily spaced, serifed kind of Times New Roman type of font. Across the top, it says Bill McKibben gives us Thoreau's Walden as the gospel of the present moment by Robert Richardson. From the back, filed in Nature/Literature, first published in 1854, Henry David Thoreau's groundbreaking Walden has influenced generations of readers and continues to inspire and inform anyone with an open mind and a love of nature. With Bill McKibben providing a newly revised introduction and helpful annotations that place Thoreau firmly in his role as cultural critic and spiritual seer, this beautiful edition of Walden for the new millennium is more accessible and relevant than ever. Obviously, that's just my version. Now, Thoreau lived from 1817 to 1862. So, wow, he died like the age we are. Like, I'm 44. You're ish the same.
41, yeah.
You're 41?
Yeah.
Well, you finished college the same year I did, but you were 3 years younger than me? Holy cow.
I finished college in 2004. I started college in 2000.
Oh, okay. So when you said you were a sophomore or a junior, you were a sophomore. That makes you feel a little bit better.
In college,
That makes you feel a little better. It's like, wow, you skipped 3 grades. Thoreau lived from 1817, Concord, Massachusetts, and he died 1862, Concord, Massachusetts. American naturalist, essayist, poet, philosopher, lifelong abolitionist, and delivered lectures that attacked the fugitive slave law. Thoreau's philosophy of civil disobedience later influenced the political thoughts and actions of many notable figures, including Leo Tolstoy, Mahatma Gandhi, and Martin Luther King Jr. Sometimes he's referred to even as an anarchist. File this one, 818.303 for literature/English North America/middle 19th century. Cal, please tell us about your relationship with Walden by Henry David Thoreau.
Interestingly, it was the hardcover version of that edition you have right there that I first read it.
Oh, cool.
Taken out of the science library at MIT, that edition with the Bill McKibben introduction.
2004.
Yeah.
It says right inside.
And so it was on the new release table, and which I would go there and I would take books off. The library would put, here's our new releases in science writing. And that's how
Where were you, at Dartmouth?
This would be now at MIT. So I graduated into...
Which bookstore? The Coop?
No, in the library.
So the library.
The library.
Not Harvard bookstore or anything.
Yeah. I mean, I would go to the Harvard Coop and I would go to the MIT one as well. But I would go to the science library. I had no money back then. I used to go to the Harvard... I'd go to the Harvard Coop I lived near Harvard Square, even though I was at MIT, and I didn't have any money. So I would just go.
Where'd you live? I lived there too.
Oh, I was living originally off Chauncey
Don't
Street.
say 1558 Mass Ave.
Not on Mass Ave. I was a little bit north of the Cambridge Commons at first, living in a building where they had a plaque outside that said Nabokov, you mentioned him earlier, wrote Lolita, staying in this apartment building. So we lived there for a while.
Gosh.
Yeah, it was really cool. And then we moved towards Huron.
And I know the crisscross fries of Cambridge Common well.
Yes, exactly. But I used to go actually to the Harvard bookstore, and I would just get a pile of books and go to that cafe on the second story and get coffee or tea, and I would just read the books because I couldn't really afford them. So I would just sit there and read them. Anyway, so I read that edition. Here's why. So I read it in grad school. So we can set the scene. I probably got it in 2005 or something. I read it by the banks of the Charles. So it was a sort of nature-y scene. It was incredibly influential because I think people misunderstand Walden, especially people who haven't really encountered it in depth. And they think of it as a nature book because he has this beautiful nature writing in it, and he's a very good nature writer. It's not a nature book. It's not primarily a nature book. I mean, look at the first chapter. The biggest chapter in the book is called Economy, right? And if you look through it, it has data tables in it. Right? There's not, hey, let me just talk about the beauty of nature. So what Walden really was an incredibly erudite self-help book. And what he was doing is saying, I have a key question about like how to design your life, how to live your life. And he had this very key question that was at the core of the first half of the book, which is he was looking at the trappings of modern life and all the things you buy and how much you have to work to get these things. And he was thinking, I think we have this trade-off wrong. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to the bare needs of existence. So I'll go out to this cabin by Walden Pond, and I'm going to figure out what's the minimum amount of money I need to survive. Like beans to plant, to food to eat. Like I'm going to build this on someone else's land. Like what's just the actual amount of money I need to not be in deprivation, right? He's like, okay, so this is our baseline. And his whole experiment was what's really worth adding on top of this? How happy am I when I'm doing this? And is it worth to do like all this more labor so I can afford this nicer thing, but that nicer thing is going to require all this labor? And he came up with this really interesting equation of, you have to consider the moments of your life and the time and energy that you have to work in order to generate the money to pay for the thing. Is that thing really worth that much of your life? And so he was grappling with these like fundamental questions about how to design your life, built around a combination of his own experiment. Let me live at the base amount. And he calculated how much, that's why he has data tables. Here's exactly how many dollars and cents it costs for me to be alive and not deprived. And then he calculated, okay, how much work, if I was just working as an hourly labor on my neighbor's farms, how much work would I have to do to generate this much money? And it was like a half a day a week or something. And he was like asking this question of like, how do we get from that to like 50 hours a week and all this stress and these mortgages? And so he was really questioning assumptions about life and the good life and what it required to live. And why did he do all that beautiful nature writing? To try to indicate like there's all this value he was getting that didn't require him to work 50 hours a week. He's like, the copper pot is nice, but also watching the ice is nice. But the copper pot required me to mortgage my farm. Yeah. So it was an erudite, self-experiment based self-help book.
The copper pot required me to mortgage my farm. Therefore it costs, in the broadest sense of the word, more.
These were the quiet desperation, right? So, famously, men living lives of quiet desperation is this key line from Walden. What was he referring to? What was the desperation he was referring to? He was referring to conquered farmers who had these mortgages on their farm so that they could buy nice stuff. And he talks about copper pots. He talks about Venetian blinds. And their desperation was that they were under this crushing loan debt. And they had to just work and work to try to keep up with this debt. And they were sort of desperate because they were trapped. And was this state of desperation worth the Venetian blinds and copper pot when watching the ice because he write about so eloquently, watching the ice change on the pond and looking at the snake and for an hour just watching this. He's like, this is just as diverting as the copper pot, but I only have to work a half day a week. So it was like a really radical self-experimental based rethinking of what's required to live a good life. I think that's such a cool genre of writing, and that really inspired me to consider radical ideas as like the foundation of writing, to like the question big assumptions, the excitement in that. So I think it's like one of the best self-help books of all time, even though we see it as literature and nature writing, and people who love it would say, I hate self-help, and self-help is so low, and why would you ever? But Walden is a fantastic self-help book.
Wow. There's a lot there. You used a couple sentences ago, you said just as diverting, like he talks about walking on the pond in the winter and how the view of it looks like totally different than when he's on there in a canoe in the summer. And you said just as diverting as the copper pot and the Venetian blind. So what do you mean divert? How are you using the word diverting? What do you mean? Like just as what?
Like capable of capturing and keeping your attention.
Just as capable of capturing your attention, meaning that is some elevated goal.
Yeah, that like this is interesting and ennobling and value producing. Just nature itself is so exciting. I mean, these all became the ideas, of course, that the counterculture movements of the 50s, 60s, and 70s in the U.S. were all building on these ideas, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. The voluntary simplicity movement, the back to lands movement, all of these movements, the commune movements, they were the original slow movement. They all are sort of pulling from some of these same radical ideas. This is a very radical book that Thoreau was throwing bombs, and like the modern reader is like, oh, that book was such a nice description of nature's beauty. It's like he was throwing bombs.
And when you say throwing bombs, you even said, I love this genre. Yeah. How would you label and define What else is on the shelf of this genre? What is this genre you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, these are any books where they try to destabilize like some idea or assumption you have in a way that then like completely changes how you think about things.
That's what we talked about at the very beginning of the conversation in terms of what the value of reading and books is in general. So it seems like this is your thing. This is what you aspire your books to do, and you are doing with your work in the New Yorker and with your email list and with your Deep Questions podcast and with your it's throwing bombs. I
mean, you can see it directly. That's why this book is so influential to me. My first two books were written before I read Walden. How to Become a Straight A Student, How to Win at College. The premise is I talk to really successful students, and here's what they do. First book I write after Walden, How to Become a High School Superstar. This is a deeply contrarian book. It's one of my favorite books that no one has read, but it's a crazy book. It's like a college admission book written like a Malcolm Gladwell book. There's a whole backstory to it, but the whole premise of this book is that all of this like stressful striving that kids are doing to get into college, they have it wrong. And I went and spent time with these kids I called relaxed superstars, including, by the way, Ramit Sethi's brother, Manish, which is interesting because I knew Ramit. I've known him for a long time, and so it's his brother. Yeah, his brother
How'd
Manish.
You cross paths with him?
Well, I knew Ramit just because we were the same age. He graduated Stanford right around the time I graduated from Dartmouth, and we had a friend in common. And it was actually Ramit who told me early on, "I have this friend Tim Ferriss. You got to read this book he's writing." So, anyways, it's all a small world.
So you call them relaxed
superstars,
relaxed superstars,
and it was kids who got into good colleges, and they were just like relaxed, interesting kids.
I totally know those kids. I hated those kids.
Yes, I wrote a whole book about them, and it was like.
They'd show up to the exam with like, I got like all these like black bags in my eyes from studying all night. Like all these, they'd like have like 3 words written on their hand as like just a way to recall a million things. I was like, they're skateboarding at night.
Yeah.
Who are these kids?
And they would get interested in things. They were like truly interesting. They didn't do a lot of things, but the things they did were interesting. Like Manish wrote a book when he was in high school, which like really made a big difference. It was like a guide to computer programming, but it really made a difference. Anyways, so I wrote that. Then the next book after that, So Good They Can't Ignore You. It argues that follow your passion's bad advice. And that was like the central piece of career advice when that book came out was follow your passion. Steve Jobs said, follow your dreams. Like, this is what you should do. That's a Walden inspired book. That's wrong. Let's rethink from the ground up. Very Walden-esque. Let's rethink from the ground up. How do you build a career you love? Like High School Superstar. Let's rethink from the ground up. What makes someone impressive? Wow. And so that bomb throwing, Deep Work had sort of a similar
counterintuitive.
Yeah, Deep Work was like stop using social media, all this stuff you're doing online, all this email and stuff. Like this isn't going to make you. This is getting in the way. You should focus on what really matters and be the person who's like disconnected. You're going to be more successful. So it's that there's a lot of Walden influence in that because I love that feeling of destabilizing something you took for granted, and when you destabilize it, opens up all these new alternatives, new opportunities for you.
Yeah, totally. That's really mesmerizing, the story itself and the way you've painted it through the through line of your books. I mean, what a great thing to be able to have written books that you can point to past selves. I mean, you don't got to go on a Facebook timeline to see it. You can just check out my bibliography, you know what I mean? Which is awesome, and congratulations and well-deserved. And now I really want to buy my kids how to be a high school superstar so they can learn to be like this. And a couple things come up for me. One is you called him the self-help guru. I mean, or you called him Thoreau, like a pre-self-help, self-help guy. And there's a question I have been trying to formulate for like a week, and I still don't have it congealed. But you're so gifted. I'm gonna give you like the embryonic question and see if you can take it from me. I'm listening to you to prepare for this with Andrew Huberman, Rich Roll, Tim Ferriss, Adam Grant, Chris Williams. It goes on and on. You were pretty much in every big podcast. I mean, maybe just not Joe Rogan, but like pretty much every big podcast you were on. And I know a lot of these guys. Like, I mean, I know we're like 1 degree of separation from a lot of these guys. And they're all rich, like financially rich. And they're all, and I include myself in all this stuff, by the way. I'm not saying they are. I'm saying they're weird. Like they're weird. Like there's a great quote. I think it was Paul Graham said recently, these days the algorithm is so homogenizing that if you're doing anything remotely interesting, you are by definition weird. So I love weird. Weird is great. It's weird not to be weird. John Lennon, I'm with you on weird. But I'm just like, when you go up close to these guys, like some of them I have been, and they're like way off. They're not 2 separations from the mean. They're like 8. They're like so rich, so hot, like attractiveness. Like I saw a picture of Andrew Huberman with his shirt off on the internet this morning. Someone was sending me a tweet and I was like, oh my God, like that guy could be on the cover of like Muscle Mag.
He's very fit. I can confirm he is very fit. Yeah.
See what I'm saying? And like, but on every level. And I'm like, is it just me, or are we taking our advice? Like, is it that is it that their stuff works so well that like this is the manifestation of it? Yeah. Because I will also say, and I mean no judgment by any of this, the whole question is non-judgmental, but there's also a lot of like, when you go up close, there's that old Naval Ravikant phrase. It's like, would I want to trade lives with the person? And often the answer is, again, no judgment, but like, family has often not been a priority for a lot of the people, or the kids are not been, and that's fine. Everyone's got their own thing. Everyone does their own life. It's great. Yeah. But I'm just looking at the self-help industry as a thing. And is it weird that the self-help echelon, let's call it whatever 10, 20 names anyone listening wants to put in there, when you go up close, you're like, this isn't really it for almost anybody.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's even achievable or desirable for most people. Like I'm stymied a bit by this wrestling I'm having with the industry I know that we're both in.
Yeah. Well, okay, here's what I think they would say. I don't think any of the people you mentioned would think of themselves as self-help gurus. I think they all think of themselves as being in the Johnny Carson role. Like their job is to bring the interesting people onto their shows and bring it. There's one exception, because Huberman does the deep dives on, so he would see like what he mainly does is actually doing research deep dives on a single topic. He'll spend 50 hours reading about melatonin and whatever. So that's a little bit different. But all these other characters, they don't see themselves as like, I'm not giving advice from my own life. I bring on interesting people. That's how they would describe themselves. And most of them, I think if you ask them, they would say, yeah, you don't want my life. Don't switch with me. Like there's a lot of stress. Like they all will tell you, and I'll tell people the same thing about me. There's a lot of stress that comes with being more public, for example. You do have, why are they don't seem like normal people. You're right about that. They're all like very interesting. That's kind of a necessity, I think, to be a media figure. Like you have to be interesting. It has you're commanding attention. It's like if you want to be on TV, you have to be
the classic Jay Leno versus David Letterman. They both looked really strange.
They looked really strange.
They were followed by Conan, who looked even stranger.
Movie stars are the same way. It's they're either like strikingly beautiful, or they're strikingly beautiful in a distinctive way. Like, if you walk past Emma Stone on the street, it would just like catch your attention.
Or Timothy Chalamet, I'm like, oh my God, this guy's like, so specifically lanky and big. Like he's an unusual.
Or Brad
character.
Pitt, you just be like, that's the most attractive human being I've ever seen in my life. Like this is like, I can't think about anything else in this party now. And so the visual podcast world, it's maybe not to be like the most attractive, but it's everyone's distinctive. Like I'm good friends, for example, with I don't know if you know the Minimalist. They have the show.
Yeah, I know them. Yeah.
But I was just out there doing that. But like Joshua, like wears his hair. It's kind of like a joke. He wears it like super bouffant high, right? Because it's interesting visually. So yeah, I agree. But I think they're not really, I mean, maybe they all see themselves, I think, as channeling other interesting people.
Is that not post-success view of yourself though? I mean, like, this is partly why I'm so attracted to like first books in general. Yeah. Like when I wrote the Book of Awesome in 2008 to 12, I mean, my wife had just left me and my best friend took his life. I'm writing an awesome thing a day. This congeals into a book. That book still has a unique energy in it that I don't think any of my books since have equal, because of what I was in my life. Like a unique, this is like a harried, up all night, frenzied, anxious, weird energy in that book.
Yeah,
I get a lot of people saying, I was going through my divorce and I lost my best friend. I read your book. Nowhere in the Book of Awesome does it say that that's what I was doing.
Yeah.
But yet it translated through. Do you know what I'm saying?
Or like that David Goggins book. It just has this like hungry, weird, interesting energy in it that like just was from this guy and what he was going through. And he's just like laying that out in a book. And it just hit people who are in similar situations. It just was like, okay, this is this is a first book. This is raw. Like this is like it just hit people in a way. It wasn't calculated.
I guess what I'm trying to also rail against, or at least bring up in a discussion point with you, and I appreciate you going there with me, is like similarly with like the ads on podcasts. Like it's like the ads on podcasts it's a ludicrously priced industry with massive thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars per read, per show, with full of this thing. And it's like, does that not do something with the message itself? Like,
yeah, maybe.
I don't know. Like, I know I'm stuck on my old stupid no ads thing that I'm stuck on from like 1983. I don't know why I'm on this world of no ads.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's too new. I think people are trying to figure it out. Like, or is it just, your favorite show on TV, then you have the Colgate commercial. It's like, yeah, the commercials are what pay for the show. And
except it's always the person on the show saying,
that's what's different about it.
I like it. I think you should buy it. Go to my name. Go to this.
Yeah, so it's weird. I think it's weird how that's working. And like, should it just all be programmatic ads? But then programmatic ads are a third of the CPM, and so it's hard to support the show. I think that's all being figured out. It's a weird world, but I actually think we should have more public intellectuals giving advice. Like, I think giving advice, we have this real concern about it, right? It's like in our current, especially like elite culture, is like, don't give advice because someone might say, who are you to give that advice? Or they'll critique you for like, well, you gave that advice, but you're missing X, Y, and Z. But I actually think it's like a healthy cultural thing to have more people like Thoreau was doing. It's like, well, look, I thought about this. I'm idiosyncratic. I'm giving a take on things. Because I've always had this belief, which is really not shared right now by a lot of people who sort of write about books. But I've always had this belief that the audience is very smart. Like, the audience is very smart. They understand their situation and context, and they're very good at, I can go back and read Thoreau. A lot of what he's talking about is not directly relevant to me. I'm not a farmer in Concord in 1850, but there's like some ideas in there I probably can adapt to me. So I was like, I want him throwing bombs. And then I'll sort of see what resonates and what still is like timeless in there, and I can do that sort of filtering. Exactly. But there's a culture now that says, no, the author has to do all that in advance, right? Like, you can't, what if someone...
Give me an example of this, because I have not heard of this not giving advice dictum.
Oh, well,
I don't disagree with you. I'm like, what do you mean exactly? Well,
first of all, like, you see this with almost any journalist that goes into nonfiction writing. If they're coming out of traditional journalism, they don't put advice in the book, even if all people want from it is advice. Like,
it's a meditation. It's an exploration. It's an investigation. Yeah. It's a gotcha.
It's Malcolm Gladwell coming out of the Washington Post and New Yorker. His books are advice books, but he would never put a piece of advice in it. Whereas I always used to talk about West Coast, East Coast pragmatic nonfiction. All the East Coast writers came out of East Coast journalism, and you can't put advice in the book. The West Coast writers are coming out of entrepreneurship. It's like Ramit and others, and they'll put advice. They're like, yeah, here's... People want information. Try this, try that. Like, it's all full of advice. Tim Ferriss, it's Rami. It's different, right? It's a different field.
Go to this website. Go to this virtual assistant category. Look up this.
Yeah, because it's a different way. So I'm a big believer. I like books to take big swings, and then like people will filter it. But there's the two fears are the who are you fear. Like, people are very afraid. They'll say, who are you to give advice? And the point is, like, everyone is their own person. We can understand the context of a person pretty easily. Yeah. Give us your best swing. And we'll see which of your balls come to our part of the field. Don't be afraid to take the swing. And then there's this weird caveat concern, right? Where it's like everyone has a particular thing that they really care about. And there's like 100 things out there you could care about. And they'll get really upset if you don't specifically like address their thing, or at least acknowledge their thing. But they don't care about the other 99 things. They're just going to be like, I'm really upset at you because, you're not thinking about... You didn't specifically talk about childcare or something, because I really care about childcare and childcare.
That's also coming up with the whole DEI stuff has gotten a little out of hand, where it's almost like you're afraid to not. I just gave a speech recently, and the person before me was laying out the sort of mandatory diversity and inclusion module that everyone, and you could just feel in the room. I'm like, no one likes this. No one agrees with this. No one understands this. Everyone's afraid of this. No one wants to say the wrong thing. No one's putting up their hand for questions. It's like, whoa, we've gotten to like a ice shattery place with some of this stuff.
Well, so you get it like outside of that context, like in nonfiction writing, right? I see it a lot. It's not DEI so much as there's also the audience completeness issue. Is so anything that started with, that's nice for you, but what about ... And so what you can do is, like, with anything that's prescriptive, is you can just look for an audience to which the advice doesn't apply. And then somehow this has become like a standard critique where, of course, all advice is for particular audiences. So it's sort of like you write a book about running. You know, you're going to have someone say, well, that's nice for you, but what about people whose foot is broken? Like they can't run, right? And so it's like, okay, so should I say, clearly this advice, for some people though, their feet is broken. So let's talk about like how they can exercise. There's a lot of that, I used to get a lot of that with Deep Work. Like I write books about knowledge workers and I'll get a lot of like, but what if you're not a knowledge worker? And what if you're this, this, and this? And I was like, well, I didn't write a book about that.
Well, that's what you're saying now, thank goodness, because you've got the awareness through the feedback. It's like, I got the same thing on the happiness equation. It's like, this is good if you're privileged enough to do that. And I'm like, well, I know, but I guess that's my view. But
but anyways, I bring it all up to say this is dissuading more people. I'm used to this, but this is dissuading new voices from giving advice. And what I would love would actually, so here's I'm going to make my DEI pitch is, I love advice and people taking swings. I want people from all sorts of jobs and backgrounds and cultural backgrounds, whatever it is. I want the biggest possible variety of people just taking Walden-esque big swings at like, don't caveat it and protect it. We'll do that as the audience. Just give it your best swing. Like we should destroy phones in a fire. Like give it the big swing. You know what I mean? Or like we should, jobs should only be 10 hours a week. Like take the principle and push it to an extreme and purify it and clarify it. That I think is so exciting. And then of course I'm a reasonable consumer of information. I'm not just going to go do those things and I'll get to the real point of what you mean and I'll reject some and accept some. But I wish there was a world where more people were taking more big swings with advice. But I think there's a lot of fear of like, what if people say, who are you? Or that might be nice for you, but what about? And that became scarier now because in social media, you hear more of it. And I think maybe it feels like it's everyone saying it. And so I think it's like scarier. And because of that, I think we have a lot less people than we could like taking swings at like interesting ideas, pragmatic ideas. And I think we need more of those ideas, not less.
Oh, man. I know you're not on Instagram, but that was an Instagram reel. Chapter 82 with Quentin Tarantino. Our final question is always give us one hard-fought piece of wisdom. And his last piece of advice was do not censor yourself.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a really good point. Do not censor yourself. There's a lot there. Become a digital minimalist. Be slowly productive while you're doing your deep work so that you can eventually be so good we can't ignore you.
There we go.
And I like that. I'm just going to say, repeat it for people. I thought about this. The 3 bullet points you said that Thoreau said, other people said, we're going to your next book is, I thought about this. I'm idiosyncratic. I'll give you my take. I like that.
Takes are great.
I thought about this. I'm idiosyncratic. I'll give you my take. That being the caveat in the middle. I'm idiosyncratic. Like you said that. I thought about this. I'll give you my take. But in the middle, you're saying, I'm just, that's kind of like the preclusion. I'm idiosyncratic.
Let me give you a quick example. Another quick example. I recently, I like this book, so I bought a first edition recently of Thomas Merton's 7-Story Mountain. This is a very idiosyncratic book. It's about, he's an NYU professor in the 50s who becomes a monk and goes to a monastery. And it's about this experience. It's a very Catholic book, but very psychological and theologically astute. There's like profound ideas in this book. Even though, of course, it's like a very weird idiosyncratic thing this person is doing. Like most of us have no interest in becoming a Trappist monk, but like it has profound ideas. Wendell Berry's the same way. He's a weird idiosyncratic guy. He's still, he's like 89 now, but he uses horses on his farm still. He's a weird guy. He also left NYU, went back to Kentucky to farm and write about farms and natures. But his books his ideas are electric and they're inspiring and interesting. Even though, like, of course, like a lot of the stuff he's writing about is like, I'm not going to farm with horses. And this is like really narrow. Yeah, that's narrow. But the ideas have like really deep resonances. So I like the weird, the idiosyncratic, the people in different situations, just like taking swings and writing essays and giving proposals and giving advice. Like I wish more people were less afraid.
But I love that. Totally agree. On the same horse. Pun intended. But you also said, I also tell people, don't change lives with me. And you said with all of these up close weirdos, and I include myself in this like wholeheartedly, by the way. Like I'm not looking at these guys outside of a lens. I'm looking at us in the petri dish here. And you said too much stress. That I heard you say that because there's too much stress. Is that what you said?
Yeah, you see this, right? You have this in your own life. Like the more public, like the more exposed you are, that's just straight up linear function stress. And like the more like exposed or public you are, like careful what you wish for. If you're like a young person who's like, I want to be famous online. No, you don't. You want to be Coen Brothers famous. Make an awesome movie. Don't let people know what you look like. Like that's better. Yeah. It's just stressful. Like the more public,
friends and famous.
but also they also, I guess, not just being visible now that I think about it, just the more like Jonathan Franzen has to care about, he has a lot more critiques of him now because he's famous or his books are more well known. He's going to get the backlashes now. It's like the more prominent you get, it rises in proportion. The better selling my book is, the more like critique I get, the more it's like interesting to be anti-Cal Newport. It's not interesting to be anti-Cal Newport when no one knows who Cal Newport is.
It's kind of like the more reviews you get, the more 1-star reviews you get.
100%. Yeah. Like a book that's all 5-star reviews. It's like a first book or it's like a quirky book. It's not a famous person's 5th book.
Oh, nice. Okay. Speaking of a famous person's first book, let's now go and close the conversation off with your 3rd most formative book. And by the way, I really appreciate this. We got like 5th gear Cal here, and I'm loving it. And I can feel your energy. It's really dynamic and palpable. Thank you. But let's now jump into your off dates, perhaps with The Sabbath by Abraham Joshua Heschel, Heschel, originally published in 1951 by Farrar, Straus, and Giroux, the most unpronounceable publisher of all time. It's a golden brown cover with stylized wood carving. I know it's the wood carving because the whole book is full of wood carvings of the menorah, but as a twisted artistic series of almost not yet bloomed roses with Hebrew letters set on each flower/candle. Abraham Joshua Heschel was born in 1907 in Warsaw, Poland, died 1972, age 65 in New York. He was a Polish-American rabbi, one of the leading Jewish theologians and Jewish philosophers of the 20th century. He got to the U.S. in 1940. Yeah. You can kind of picture war-ish times.
He barely got here.
Yeah. Okay, you know more than me.
Yeah.
And then learned English, and then wrote this book 11 years later, which you can file, by the way, under 296 for religion/other religions/Judaism. Cal, tell us about your relationship with The Sabbath by Abraham Joshua Heschel.
Yes, I like a lot of his books. I think somehow when you come to a language late, it can lead to a much more interesting style, much more like considered style. You kind of learn it from scratch. He's a beautiful writer because he mixes in all of his books the poetic with also like the highly structured, almost academic rational. And he moves back and forth between those forms, like in the same chapter. So he'll be like beautifully poetic, but also be laying out some sort of argumentative structure that's like well structured and balanced. And so he's a really cool writer. It can be tough. This is like one of his more accessible books, for sure. But I really admire him.
Still tough, by the way.
It's still tough.
I found it still tough for me.
Yeah, this one's
pages,
tough.
But
yeah, this one is it's a little tough. It's a little interesting. I mean, if you read more of him, it's interesting. I mean, when I like reading,
I loved it. Look at all, I made a ton of notes.
It's a cool book. I like reading. Religious thinkers can write really cool books because they're so contemplative. Jewish religious thinkers write really cool books because like all they do is sit around and think and grapple with things, and it comes up with like really cool books. So I'm a fan of his. I'm a fan of the late Rabbi
The Sabbath,
Jonathan Sacks. Going, okay, so The Sabbath. Why do I like this book? So it does a lot of things. It's a theological discussion of Shabbat, the Sabbath, the day of rest from the Bereshit, from the Genesis.
So those that don't know this, just give me 3 more sentences on the Sabbath, what it is.
Right. Genesis. So in that tradition, and so like the Judeo-Christian tradition,
on the first day,
there's one day. So when you look at the 7-day story of God's creation of earth, on the 7th day, he rested. Right. So that's the Sabbath. And so you're commanded then to do that yourself. And so Christians place the Sabbath on Sundays and Jews place the Sabbath on Saturdays. But it comes from the same book of, what we'd call English Genesis. Right. And so he's doing
they just started on a different day.
They different calendars. Yeah. Start on a different day. But whatever, it's both the last day by however they count. So this book is trying to like understand this tradition. And there's some theological arguments in it. Like his main theological argument is that Judaism versus like the religious cults that came before and different than Eastern religions is sanctifies time and not space. So it's a religion that exists in history in real time. It's not an abstraction. We're not looking back to abstractions, and it's not as much about sanctified places as it is like this time is important. But he has another argument in there that has a very secular resonance. And so he's explaining like God working to create Earth and God resting. And he's putting this out as a sort of ideal template for the human experience, which I think is like really relevant. I came to this book much more recently, so I think it's really relevant for this pandemic, post-pandemic moment of work and work angst and anti-work movement and slow productivity and all the stuff that's going on right now. This book really resonated with me when I read it, because he's arguing, well, the work is important. I mean, God was creating the earth, and this was important. This was important stuff, and it was good. And they used the Hebrew word for good, right? That these acts of creation are good. But then God rested for the last day. And there, that not only is that good, they didn't use the word good there. This was the one day where they described it as holy, kedusha, holy, the Hebrew word for holy. So like the day of rest is holy as well. And Heschel makes this argument, like it's holy not in some instrumental sense, not in some sense of it's your reward for the work, not in some sense of it's going to recharge you so you can do more work, but because it allows you to appreciate like the other wonders of life. Like the tradition they would talk about, it's supposed to give you a taste of like a utopian post-redemption afterlife. It's like your taste of the world to come, and that's what you're celebrating. But you can see it as you're appreciating all the other stuff that's holy, that's not work. And so like the work was good, but also like the other stuff is holy as well. And so there was something really critical about that seemed to me to unlock like how to think about work, how to think about anti-work, how to think about productivity, how to think about anti-productivity. That like we had this figured out as humans back in this late Bronze Age when the things that coalesced into this book were first being told and surviving cultural evolution was like the work can be good and important. And also the non-work is good and important and holy even. And both of this stuff is important. And somehow we have to figure out how to keep both. So we can't just come at our current moment and be like, work or the urge to work is just an epiphenomenon of capitalist exploitation. But we also can't come at it and be like, okay, what matters is work. We need to rest just so we can get better at work. Like sleep is about maximizing work. Like all that matters is like the work. We had this figured out, in 800 BC that both are important. So anyways, I found a real secular resonance from this otherwise theological book.
Yeah, absolutely. National Geographic said in January, I think 2022, that, the world is tilting towards a secular majority. The US, I think, maybe have crossed 50%. People no longer ascribe to a particular faith. I know Canada's over that threshold. Finland, the UK, France, the Netherlands, Australia, New Zealand, and like the world is kind of, the fastest growing religion in the world is none. You've maybe heard that. Mm-hmm. To the point where I wrote an article for Harvard Business Review in like 2019 or something called "Why You Need an Untouchable Day Every Week and How to Get One." They titled it. It was a good title. And then I'm reading the comments, and someone's like, "This dude's just saying the Sabbath." Like, I didn't even.
You invented Genesis. Congratulations.
Yeah, exactly. 2,800 years later or whatever. So, first of all, just for context, when did you read it? How did it come to you? I get how it's been formative. So you read this most recently of the three. So yeah. Were you like where were you in your life here? How'd you get this book?
This is like after the pandemic started, like sometime like late pandemic.
Relatively recent.
Relatively recently. I'd read a lot of Heschel and I hadn't read this one.
So you read it in the pandemic. You're like, it's like pandemic time. You're reading this book. How do you practice it in your life? You're the guy that wrote the book, Deep Work. I know I've heard Mark Manson and many other people saying self-help authors are talking to themselves. You know what I mean? Like this is a common trope in the self-help industry that we're talking to ourselves. Yeah. Whenever I complain or whine over text or email, someone's like, "Yeah, I got a real good book for you, buddy. It's called The Happiness Equation." Have you not read your own damn book? So I'm asking just in general, you come across this book. It strikes a nerve with you. It is if I understand it correctly, a religious-based kind of treatise, if that's the right word, that has broad societal and personal implications.
Yeah.
You have also written a lot on this topic in general with books like Deep Work, Digital Minimalism, and most recently Slow Productivity. So like, what's the Cal Newport manifestation of this today?
Well, I mean, first of all, you'll see those fingerprints throughout Slow Productivity, right? I mean, this idea of take longer, it's you're producing the good thing over time. It's not about the hustle in every moment. It's the what did you produce over the last 5 years, not what did you produce today. Like that notion of stretching out your definition of productivity. There's a real sort of Heschelian Sabbath type of idea in there. I try to actually follow something like that practice of a Sabbath or Shabbat every weekend.
So tell me what that looks like.
Well, I try to match it.
Because, you know, the intro of the book is like, my parents are running, she's written by his daughter. My parents are running around like Friday night, like, you know, getting the steamer going on the kettle and this, and then like literally the clock, you know, I think it's the sun goes down and then like they just stop. If something's going on the stove, they don't finish cooking it. Like, it's like a lights out kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, no, so I'm not Shomer Shabbat, as they would say. That's the sort of, like an Orthodox Jew, like the Heschels would, you have all these things you don't do. But I like the Jewish timing versus the Christian timing, because Saturday versus Sunday.
But it's not Saturday, isn't it? Like Friday night.
It's
sundown?
Friday night at sundown to Saturday at sundown, but it's, you know, predominantly on Saturday versus like the Christian timing of Sunday, because Sundays it's right before the week starts again. Saturday, that seems like the right day to try to the step away and appreciate the holy, is because your week is ended at Friday, like starting Friday night. How perfect is that? Like,
what do you do? So what do you do in your Friday sundown to Saturday? What do you do? What don't you do? What are
no
you
email.
allowed?
Yeah. So it's no work, no email, so no work, no email, no. I say no news. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. It's content that is created to create a reaction, right? So nothing viral. Like I can see a newspaper or something, but no, like I'm gonna mess around on my phone or something like that.
But
and
you're allowed to use your phone.
Yeah, but I don't know if I would use it much. I mean, I would use it if like.
And I know your phone is kind of like my phone. No game apps, no social media apps, black and white.
Exactly.
Like your phone's pretty locked down to begin with.
I use it to like text a few people, most of whom are related to me, and to stream baseball games. So yeah, but I like
Nationals.
Shut down. Yeah, and today's opening
my
day.
Team, by the way. I mean, this is the Expos. Let's be honest here.
Okay, I get you. We will take that. We'll make that connection. We're brothers now.
I'm just saying.
We're brothers.
In 1993 or 94, sorry, the Jays had won the 92 and 93 World Series. Shout out to Roberto Alomar and Joe Carter and Devon White. And in 1994, the Expos, managed by Felipe Alou, I believe, had at the time of the baseball strike the best record of all time in baseball by that time of the season.
That strike.
And they never played another game in Montreal again.
Yeah.
It was like you couldn't have ended that story on a worse note in Montreal.
Yeah.
The first baseball team outside of the U.S. And then like they never won. The Toronto team wins, a new rich city. Like they took over in population and skyscrapers. Now they get the World Series. And then they had the best season in baseball history. Yeah. And then they never played a game in Montreal again.
Well, but we appreciate it down here in DC because we've been having a great time with the team. So it went to a good cause, Neil. I mean, we're happy. We're happy to have the team.
Just promise me you'll wear a Montreal Expos hat to a baseball game at some point.
I will. They're around. They're around. I was just there the other day for the Futures game. People wear them.
Okay.
All right. But anyways, all right. My practice, try to Friday after I'm done with work until Sunday. Try not to do any work, any email, any like looking at content meant to like get you excited, and just it's family time, it's reading time, it's go on adventures time. My wife and I try to, when we can, have like a standing date on Saturday night. We see a lot of movies and stuff like that. It's huge for me, especially when I'm in these periods of high stress, like book launches, etc. To just know you can fully move out of that mindset. And like, I'm not going to check something because I don't check something till Sunday. Like having the rules be really clear makes a big difference. And so that's a great.
You're inspiring me. I'm not nearly as fastidious, although I love the differentiation between. I don't read like online news as much. I do read it. I don't read it as like when I turn stuff off, I turn that off for sure. I don't have any cancel all my news, but I'll still like if I buy a paper Saturday or Sunday New York Times, like that is a different part of my brain somehow.
Yeah, you're not. It's not being curated by algorithms. You're just sort of like encountering what's there. They made their money.
Ads. I want to see the full page. What Yoko Ono's got to say this week.
Yeah, they made their money when you bought it, so they don't need to now like get you to compulsively.
Oh, the business model investigation piece again. You're good at peeking under the hood of the.
It's also the New York.
How do they make?
It's the New Yorker model. Yeah, we got these subscribers. We have 1 million subscribers, and they pay a lot of money. It's an expensive magazine. So then we can just
it's like $700 a year or something.
It's cheaper than that, but
I'm in Canada.
Yeah, well, that's different. It should be cheaper, but they've got that's it. So they don't worry about ads. They don't worry about. So they just like we can just like try to write really great stuff. Get good writers, like write great stuff because we're not playing the game of like viral online spread. So we can have a writer, like when I work on articles for they're like, go work on this. We'll help you. Let us know what help you need. And you just sort of work on it till you're done. You know,
how many edits are you doing? How many rounds of editing with them? I've heard David Sedaris told us, people don't realize I do 17 rounds of editing before I send to them and 11 rounds after.
It's a lot of editing. Yeah. And
that's your experience as well?
It depends on the article. Like if you nail it, it's, it takes it's a lot of editing.
Who's your editor there?
I work with a couple people. I just started working with a new editor named Morella. I was working with Josh Rothman as well before that.
Man, I'm not going to get to my millions of New Yorker questions, so I'm going to have to park that. But I got lots to say about the New Yorker. I just did a massive deep dive interview with Susan Orlean, New Yorker staff writer since 1992, and
sure, it's my favorite thing I do. It's the most fun thing I do.
It's the favorite thing I do. Oh, that's cool.
It's so fun. It's so fun.
We're going to close off with the fast money round questions now. Cal, are you ready?
All right.
Hardcover, paperback, audio, or e?
All depending on the circumstance.
Nice.
Whatever's quick. Like if I really want to start reading a book, I'll get the ebook because I don't want to wait a day or two to get it. If I really like a book, I will go back and buy usually like a first edition or early edition hardcover. So I'll have multiple copies of it. I try to read books on audio, but I have a much worse success rate, except for very specific types of books. So it's I'm on all the formats,
except paperback.
Paperback. So if a book's in paperback, that's what I'll buy. If I can wait a day or so to get it. If I love it, I'll go and buy a vintage hardcover copy of it for my library.
Yeah. This begs the next question, which is how do you organize your books on your bookshelf? I
It's by subject. I have multiple libraries, but I have a library at home with all built-in bookcases and library lights that like shine down on it. I love my library. It's all organized by topic, all types of books. Like here is all of my like technology criticism books. These shelves are all fiction. This is like my business books. Here's my like vintage productivity books. I did a New Yorker article earlier this year where I walked through my collection of vintage productivity books, starting with the 50s and like how did they change from each decade. So I'm a by topic organizer.
Sounds like the Newport decimal system.
Yes. I know where every book is in my house.
Here I am using Dewey in my house. Wow. And what are library lights?
So like at the top of the bookshelves, like they come out and they shine down on the books in the shelf.
How do I not know this? I didn't know this.
They're great. They like come out, they're brass.
The thing I've heard of that I don't have in my house, but I wish I had when I built my bookshelf is the bottom shelf kind of, like on a 20-degree angle. Have you seen that?
So you can see
every bookshelf. This is a Billy bookcase, but every the one upstairs we actually did build in our walls, and we did do the corner being a front-facing corner unit, so I could get my thematic. But I've seen in bookstores that the very bottom shelf tilts out at like a 10 to 20 degree angle, and it's awesome.
Yeah,
you don't kick the books or whatever, but it's like such a good way to look at the bottom shelf. Otherwise, you have to like squat to see it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I love that.
What is your book lending policy?
Oh, I give books out left and right. The only problem is my books are marked up 6 ways to Sunday. So I'm happy to lend it to you. I love people to read books that I like, but they're going to be marked up.
How do you mark up books? What are your one or two key markup pieces?
I do corner marking. So I put I slash the corner if I'm marking that page, and then I do brackets and check marks, and that's it. And I do that as I read real-time minimal fiction. I can go back through and follow those marks and recoup the main ideas of a book. It takes about 5 minutes. If you've corner marked a book, you go to the pages marked, you read the things, you remember it. So all my books are corner marked.
Wow. Do you have a white whale book? or a book you have been chasing the longest?
You mean in terms of getting a good version of it or reading it?
Personally left it vague, but I guess I meant reading.
That's it. Yeah. I do have. I have a few books that,
or a genre even that you're like, I've never read anything by this. Me, it's like the Russians. You know what I mean? I've read like one Russian book.
I do. Like I have like one of my New Yorker editors who's like a literature PhD was like, you need to read Anna Karenina, and I bought it, and I have it, but I haven't read it yet.
Okay, great. We'll put that as your white whale book for now.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite bookstore, living or dead?
Bookstore. Well, here in my hometown, an independent bookstore finally opened. It's called People's Book. I love that. Yeah, I'm in that place all the time.
Sorry, what town? I thought Politics and Prose was your.
I like Politics and Prose too. So
I know you did that event there with David Epstein, but
I did.
Yeah,
so I gave you the geography. So I live in Washington, D.C., but I live in a small town right at the border of D.C. called Tacoma Park.
Okay, got it.
And in that small town at Tacoma Park, so like it's 50 feet from where I'm sitting right now in my studio is an independent bookstore. That's where I did all my signed copies through. You could order them through this bookstore, and we sold 400 or 500 copies.
Books.
People's Book.
No apostrophe is like people's. Like
no, it's people's plural, book singular. And then Politics and Prose is like the big independent store in DC. I've loved them as well. I've done 5 or 6 events there, and I did a book launch. That's why I did my book launch there recently. So that's an awesome store as well.
The conversation with you and David was great in his newsletter, by the way. I thought that was really well done.
David's the greatest. But I can walk to be able to walk to a bookstore and like know the owners and like know the staff. It's my dream. So I've been happy about that.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I live in downtown Toronto. When I first moved here, people said, my cousins were like, there's houses in downtown Toronto? Like, isn't it just people walking around like puking and rats and stuff? And I was like, do you know how many bookstores I can walk to from my house that are open until midnight? Like, that was my big like comeback.
That was your pitch. Yeah. Like,
yeah. What we've had a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate your time, your generosity. Again, especially this is post-launch for you. This is an evergreen show. I only have guests on once. It's 333 inspiring conversations for 1,000 formative books total. The show's done on April 26, 2040. We know the end date. So it's curated. And thanks for being part of our curation. So what is your final piece of hard-fought advice or wisdom for all the book lovers, writers, makers, sellers, and librarians listening to this chat?
Well, I guess I'll focus on book writers since like among that list, that's what I am. Look, if you're writing a book, in the end, there's all this other stuff we do, and we talk to people and do interviews and have podcasts or this or that. But like in the end, the thing that matters is writing the book that delights you. And that's like your best chance of changing minds and making an impact. Like the book that delights you, and it'll do what it'll do. But that's what makes this like an interesting field. It was what makes this a rewarding career. And it's how the very best, biggest performing books are often written. It's weird and idiosyncratic and brilliant. It's like Walden was at the time. So you got to write what delights you. And then the other stuff, let that work out.
Cal Newport, write what delights you. Thank you so much. This has been absolutely inspiring. So I'm like going to be reeling and processing this for days after. There's so much nutritional, intellectual density in this conversation. I am so grateful. Thank you so much for coming on 3 Books.
Thanks, Neil. It was great. I enjoyed it.
Hey everybody, it's just me, just Neil again, hanging out in my basement, listening to the wise and wonderful Cal Newport take us so many different places in this chapter of 3 Books. Did any quotes jump out for you? I got a pile in front of me to just kind of give you some of my highlights. How about this one? Actually, I want to start with books. I think books are the best bargain in the human intellectual experience. I just wanted to pause, underline, bold, highlight that one. I think books are the best bargain in the human intellectual experience. He expanded because you're spending $20 to get what a mind has been specialized on, an idea that has been specialized on for years and spent years trying to crystallize that knowledge into the optimal structure, and you get to transfer all that cognitive effort from that brain to your brain for like $20. A wonderful way to put it, obviously, our next chapter, or it's going to be the next chapter, one after that, is with Jonathan Franzen, and he talks a lot about working and reworking pieces of writing so that they become totally polished. And again, Cal Newport's bringing us back to the value of books, the value of 3 books, and the value of all this stuff that we're all focused on here. Only podcast in the world buying for book lovers, writers, makers, sellers, and librarians. And most of us are book lovers first and foremost. That's why we're here. That's why we're hanging out. So it's nice to hear Cal give us, solidify our purpose for being here together now. I like this one. I think young people have been given this idea, which comes from the social media companies themselves, that you can just directly alchemize yourself by being vulnerable and visible and open. And that will somehow alchemize into being really valuable. That's actually the thing that makes you valuable and well known. And that's not the way it works. You still need craft. You still need to do something. This is a really nice reminder to me because I can tend to get obsessed and worried about like what's going on online and how many, we're putting these things on YouTube. Like now I'm recording videos. Now we're editing a video version of it. It's a lot of extra work. And then it's like, how many views do we get? How many followers do we get? How many subscribers? It's like, just focus on the craft. Just take the advice in slow productivity to obsess over quality. Focus down, not up and around, right? And try to just get better and better at what you're doing. How about this one? Last one. When is it appropriate for someone to get unrestricted internet access? The safe answer is 16. And the culture's not there yet, but I think we're a year or two away from that being a very common thing. If you think about unrestricted internet access, I mean, I had it younger than 18 because I was coming of age when the internet access kind of came up with bulletin board services and things like that. But now with the publication of The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, our past guest on 3 books, H-A-I-D-T, we are shifting the classic 15-year time period. We're more aware now than ever before about the risks and damage that can be done if you just give kids the whole internet in their pocket, right? Jonathan Haidt is saying that we have been kind of overprotective of our kids physically and underprotective of them digitally. And so we're kind of righting that ship now. Cal Newport, thank you so much for coming on the show and giving us 3 more books to add to our top 1,000. We're getting close to the 500s now, people. Cal has given us number 606, Getting Things Done by David Allen, number 605, Walden by Henry David Thoreau, and number 604, The Sabbath by Abraham Joshua Heschel. It's Heschel. Thank you to Cal. Thank you to all of you. Thank you so much for being here. All right. Did you make it past the 3-second pause? If so, I'd love to welcome you back to the end of the podcast club. You made it. You're at the very end. Now it's time for our after party. It's one of 3 clubs that we have for 3 Books listeners, including the Cover to Cover Club. Just drop us a line. Let us know if you are listening to every single chapter of 3 books. We're going to add your name to the FAQ. Put your name in lights. Okay, we started doing that, so we're getting the names coming in now. And the Secret Club. I can't say more about this, but you can call our phone number for clues. And please do call our number. It is 1-833-READ-A-LOT. That is a real number. 1-833-READALOT. Read a lot. And let's start off the end of the podcast club, as we always do, by going to the phones. Here we go.
Hi, Neil. This is Leah calling from Huntsville, Alabama. I'm about 5 years late to your podcast. I found out about it. Sorry about the background noise. I'm walking on my lunch break. But I found out about 3 books when you were on Rich Roll's podcast. And since then, I have been voraciously listening to every episode. I think that was about 2 months ago, and I'm on chapter 59 now. I just wanted to call and tell you how much I am enjoying the podcast and let you know how much it has just broadened my reading. I love to read, but I just finished Enlightenment Now by Steven Pinker, and I don't believe that's a book I would have read without hearing about it on your podcast. Currently reading Quiet, but there are so many things I love. I am planning to write you a letter to let you know because it's too long to discuss in this voicemail. But I just wanted to let you know, listen to chapter 58 with David Mitchell. Really could not believe that you played music afterwards. I was in my car listening to that episode and thought that Apple Music had picked up and then realized it was the podcast. So I truly appreciate everything you're doing and look forward to actually catching up to the episode that you're probably currently on, because right now we're still in 2020. I have no doubt that I'll pick up and then be on your moon schedule. So take care, and again, just love everything you're doing. Goodbye.
Thank you so much to Leah from Huntsville, Alabama, for calling our phone number, 1-833-READ-A-LOT. Leah is just wonderful. First of all, I love that you are walking on your lunch break. Everybody should walk on their lunch break. We all got to get outside more. American Time Use Study says only 7% of our days are outside. Get outside. Breathe in the phytoncides, the natural chemical that trees release in order to reduce your cortisol and, your stress hormones. Great. Get outside. Thank you for calling. Call me from outside. If you're outside right now and you're wondering, just tell me one formative book in your life, one guest you dream of, one thing that you liked or didn't like from the show. Give me a call, 1-833-READ-A-LOT. Also, Leah, a couple references here to other chapters. You said you're on chapter 59 now, which is with Jeff Speck, author of Walkable City, which I found out about from Ann Bogle. Okay, wonderful books podcaster. She picked Walkable City when I met up with her in New York just before the pandemic. You mentioned the music at the end of chapter 58 with David Mitchell. That is the Cloud Atlas Sextet. I actually paid for the rights of the composer, but if you're on Spotify or something, you want to find that, I recommend just putting that music on loop. I sometimes write to it. Cloud Atlas Sextet, Sextet. And then you also mentioned Enlightenment Now, book by Steven Pinker. I had to go back and just double check, but that book was given to us in chapter 12 by Chris Anderson, head of TED. And you also mentioned Susan Cain's book, Quiet, Bittersweet, two big gems. Susan was our first ever live podcast guest back in chapter 102 down at the 92nd Street Y. Just honestly going through those numbers of those chapters, I'm kind of realizing it's been 6 years already. I was 38 when I started. I'm now 44. Part of the value of pegging a show to the full moon and the lunar calendar, it's just that it gives us a bit of a pacefulness. Sometimes I feel like I haven't done anything all day. I have this self-critical feeling inside me. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm wasting my day. Like, oh my gosh, it's lunch. I haven't done anything yet. I have this feeling. And then, this is the benefit of having these 1,000-point kind of calendar things is, oh yeah, we did have that conversation 5 years ago, right? Little bits, bit by bit by bit. That's the way to do it. All right, now it is time for the letter of the chapter. And for this chapter's letter, we are going to go to Niti. Niti has written us a letter. I want to just read it out loud now. Okay, here we go. Let's zoom in on the letter here. Dear Neil, I have been a devoted listener of your podcast for more than 3 years now, and only today have I dared to request a guest for your show. Why today, you may ask? Well, there are a handful of reasons. First, I really want to earn the right to recommend a guest, which after being a loyal listener, I would want to believe I have. You absolutely have. Second, I came across the perfect context when listening to episode or chapter 134 with Susan Orlean. In the chapter, you ask Susan to recommend Indian writers and books. As an Indian listener who would love to have Chitra Banerjee Divakarani on the show, I thought this would be the perfect time. From the day I first decided to request Chitra on the show, I've been thinking of the right choice of words to describe the impact her books have had on my life. This is the third reason for waiting so long. I am convinced that my limited vocabulary and flimsy writing abilities will never be able to describe the profound impact of her writings. Today, I am banking more on the serendipity that unfolded in the last chapter than on my written expression. It would be great if you could reach out to Chitra. I'm sure many of the listeners will enjoy your conversation with her. I would be thrilled. From Nita B over in India recommending Chitra. I want to get the last name right here, but I'm probably not going to be able to. Chitra Banerjee Divakarani on the show. Okay, who else knows Chitra Banerjee Divakarani? An Indian-American author and poet, and she's currently the professor of writing at University of Houston. Oh, interesting. She got a short story collection called Arranged Marriage, which won an American Book Award in 1996. Let's reach out to her. We need to have more Indian. I want to have more global guests in general, right? I want to have I mean, part of the advantage of recording virtually like this, because the show started just in person only. And I love doing in-person interviews. That is obviously the dream, right? You get a connection that I don't think can be replicated virtually. But if we're going to be doing virtual conversations, which we started in the pandemic, then, how do we talk to more people from India, from Africa, from Southeast Asia, from, places that it's harder for me to get to? And so I'm adding Chitra Banerjee Divrakarani to our pitch list. We have a big, giant pitch list. I will add her to that. We'll look up her email address. We'll reach out to her. Really, I should probably pick up that book, Arranged Marriage, kind of get familiar with the writing myself a little bit first. It's a pressure I put on myself, get familiar with the writing first. And other international guests, I will also say, Niti, you've given me the kind of purpose to reach out to everybody. If you have a guest that's far away from North America that you think we should have with their interesting background, their interesting experience, their interesting voices, maybe it's connected to books, maybe it's not. Maybe they're an author, maybe they're not. Maybe they run the largest publishing house in Namibia. I don't know. Then reach out to us, give me a call, give me an email. It's 1-833-READ-A-LOT if you want to phone me. And our contact information, if you want to drop me an email, is over at 3books.ca as well. Okay. And now, as always, let's go back. Now it's time for the word of the chapter. And for the word of the chapter, let's head over to Mr. Cal Newport. Over to you, Cal.
Teleology.
Yes, indeed, it is teleology. Teleology. Can we hear it from the dictionary lady?
Teleology.
Teleology. Teleology. The basic meaning is the study of ends or purposes. A teleologist attempts to understand the purpose of something by looking at the results. Complicated word, big word. Cal used a lot of interesting words. Productivity, prawn, schema, synergy, nihilistic, erudite, ennobling, linear function, we could have done a SoundCloud here, but let's focus on this word that neither of us really knew what he meant when he said it, but that's what the whole point of the word of the chapter is. On Wikipedia, teleology is finality, a branch of causality giving the reason or an explanation for something as a function of its end, its purpose, or its goal, as opposed to a function of its cause. A purpose that is imposed by human use, such as the purpose of a fork to hold food, is called extrinsic. Natural teleology, common in classical philosophy, though controversial today, contends that natural entities also have intrinsic purposes, regardless of human use or opinion. For example, Aristotle claimed an acorn's intrinsic telos is to become a fully grown oak tree. Right, okay. What is the telos of this show? What is the telos of you in this conversation? Something to think about as we get ready for the full moon in May, chapter 136. Guys, 3 Bookers, thank you so much for being here. This has been a long conversation, a deep conversation, a profound conversation. If you haven't already done so, check out Cal's new book, Spill Productivity. Check out his podcast, Deep Questions. Thank you so much to Cal Newport for being on here. And thank you to all of you for listening. And remember, until next time, that you are what you eat and you are what you read. Keep turning that page, everybody. And I'll talk to you soon. Take care.